they're out
of the Black community not getting full justice, and what specifically do you plan to do to calm a community that's long been hurting? And do you understand that anger that people might feel?
I certainly understand the pain that has been brought about by the tragic loss of Ms. Taylor. I understand that as a Attorney General who is responsible for all 120 counties in terms of being the chief legal officer, the chief law enforcement officer. I understand that. I understand that as a black man, how painful this is. And which is why it was so incredibly important for make sure that we did everything we possibly could to uncover every fact. And I know, look, this team, myself, the members of the representatives of the Attorney General's office have taken a lot of criticism and scrutiny. But that scrutiny in many ways was misplaced, because there was not a day that people in this office didn't go to sleep thinking about this case. And it wasn't a day where the first thing on our minds is getting to the truth in this case. And obviously, again, the criminal law is not meant to respond to every sorrow and grief. And that is true here. But
I just think it's amazing.
For the loss of Ms. Taylor. And I've said that repeatedly. My mother, if something was to happen to me, would find it very hard. And I've seen that pain on Ms. Palmer's face. I've seen that pain in the community. And what our responsibility in the AG's office was to make sure that we uncovered every fact, that we utilized every resource that we could bring to bear to uncover the facts and the truth, and that's ultimately what we presented to the grand jury. On the question of what my mother, if something was to happen to me, would find it very hard. And I've seen that pain on Ms. Palmer's face. I've seen that pain in the community. And what our responsibility in the AG's office was to make sure that we uncovered every fact, that we utilized every resource that we could bring to bear to uncover the facts and the truth, and that's ultimately what we presented to the grand jury. On the question of what I'm going to do, I've talked to partners in the community about helping to be a constructive member of any conversations moving forward. I recognize in my remarks, I mentioned the fact that we'll be establishing a task force in the coming days ahead to look at best practices for warrants. So there is a lot that I can do in this platform to help.
Okay. Sir, this is Maria Sacchetti with the Washington Post. Just had a couple of quick questions.
I hear your voice. Okay.
Hi, sorry, over here in the back. Just wanted to double check. Did the grand jury ever consider the charges of manslaughter, reckless homicide? And if not, could you please explain why? And do you anticipate any other charges in this case?
I apologize. Could you say that a little louder?
Sure.
I think I got...
Sure. Did the grand jury ever consider manslaughter or reckless homicide or those kinds of charges? And if not, please explain why. And do you anticipate any other charges, or is this it?
I won't get into the specifics again of the proceedings themselves are secret, but what I will say is that our team walked them through every homicide offense and also presented all of the information that was available to the grand jury, and then the grand jury was ultimately the one that made the decision about indicting Detective Hankinson for wanton endangerment. I think that in terms of what happened the wee hours of March 13th, in terms of that particular or specific date and what happened that night in the apartment, I think it is unlikely that there will be any additional prosecutions that come from that event itself.
one of them killing her. Now, for the people that are demanding justice for these officers, we understand one officer has been charged with the wanted endangerment. But from what you saw early on when you first heard these charges, you thought police were basically doing their job, and Breonna Taylor, unfortunately, was caught in the crossfire. But again, it's hard to believe the crossfire was her apartment.
Well, again, I don't know that I thought that the police were doing their job. I wanted to know more about what the evidence was going to be in connection with this case. And now the Attorney General laying out a lot more of that evidence. Think about it this way. When you're talking about justice, there's civil justice and there's criminal justice. I think it's important that we not ignore the fact that the city has settled a civil lawsuit, meaning without admitting wrongdoing, by paying $12 million and instituting a whole host of changes in the way they're going to do policing, they're admitting wrongdoing. So that's step one. Step two becomes, are there going to be criminal charges? And if you think about it this way, which is, if the officers had a legal right to be there, and if you believe that Kenneth Walker fired first, it is hard to see how there would be charges against the officers who responded. Now, there are disputes about the facts. There are disputes about whether they announced themselves. There are disputes potentially about who fired first, etc. But when looking at it through a really strictly legal prism, it is hard to see if those two things are true, legally appropriate to be there in the first place, and was fired at by someone in the house, how there could be criminal murder charges filed against those particular officers.
Let them make a determination about what to do with that information.
And were they presented with charges for Mattingly or Cosgrove?
I'm sorry.
Mattingly and Cosgrove. Were they presented with any charges for Mattingly or Cosgrove?
Well, what I will say is that they will walk through all the homicide offenses, and with that information and the information and facts that were provided to them that we uncovered in our investigation, they made the determination that Detective Hankinson was the one that needed to be indicted here. Yes, ma'am.
General Cameron, just a couple questions. First of all, does the Catholic doctor apply at all in Kenneth Walker's song? The second question is, could you give me an idea of the percentage of people who know where to cover on the team of investigators presented to the grand jury?
So what I will say is there's obviously I don't want to get into the proceedings related to Mr. Walker. That's a separate, so I'm not going to have any comment on that. This team behind me presented to the grand jury. And your other question was about the racial makeup of...
Percentage of color of folks who are on the investigative team?
Well, I'm black, and I speak for the entire department. And I hope that will satisfy that question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
I know that you said the investigation has obviously taken months and it was presented to the grand jury Monday. Can you tell us, when did the grand jury actually, how long did they deliberate? Did they begin on Monday or did they begin Tuesday? And that was this week, correct?
The grand jury was presented with the information today. I won't get into the specifics of when they began their deliberations, but I will say that they started early Monday and concluded sometime before noon. And so they heard everything they needed to hear. We didn't withhold anything from them. And I hope that satisfies your question.
General, can you tell me...
This task force, and I imagine that some of the policy questions and some of the policy proposals that have already been put forward and have entered into the public conversation will be a part of this task force. But I want to make sure that people recognize that this task force is being established not to demonize any one side or any one department or agency. I think it's a healthy thing for the Attorney General from time to time to be a part of a conversation with all 120 counties. I'm not talking or singling out any county specifically, but with all 120 counties about best practices that can be utilized. I had a recent conversation with somebody that said there is always room for improvement. I think that's important in any industry, important in any job. And so as part of my role as the Attorney General, I certainly recognize the part I have to play in making sure that all of our systems in government are improved upon, whether it be because of a particular matter that occurred or because from time to time it's just the responsible thing to do.
Did any of the officers ask?
Sorry, Joe?
Yeah. Did any of the officers ask to testify or present evidence to the grand jury, and were any allowed to?
Well, what I'll say on that is, again, I don't want to get into the specifics, but testimony was heard by the grand jury of all sorts of witnesses and folks. And so, again, all relevant information was provided to the grand jury for them to make their assessment. Yes, sir.
When you look,
Yes, sir.
when you look at the analysis of the path of the bullets, how was it that Kenneth Walker, who fired the shot at the officers, was not hit, and Breonna Taylor was hit so many times?
Well, that's part of the tragedy here. And again, I don't want to get into the specifics, but the fact that she was hit breaks my heart, and it breaks the collective heart of all the country. But I don't want to get, because we have now an open prosecution, I don't want to get too into the details of the trajectories themselves.
Two follow-up questions. One, I understand that the names of grand jurors aren't released, but what rule or standard prevents you from releasing the racial and gender makeup of the grand jury? And number two, you've mentioned that Cosgrove fired the fatal shot, but could you clarify how many shots in all that hit Ms. Taylor were fired by, and how many shots that hit Ms. Taylor were fired by Cosgrove?
Well, as to the last question, inconclusive in terms of how many shots from each officer. We weren't able to identify with that level of specificity. As to the question about the makeup of the grand jury, we might be able to, I need to confirm on that front about.
Cancer can take away so much.
Well, I'm like, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to.
Scrutiny, I think it'd be inappropriate for me to share the information about the makeup of the grand jury, just to the extent I can protect them.
Will you release the investigative file or recommend that LMPD release it?
Well, look, the role that we now have is to pursue the ongoing prosecution against Detective Hankinson. And so I think it'd be irresponsible at this juncture for this office to release any sort of file, again, because we have this ongoing prosecution. And I'm not going to comment on, and I think I certainly shouldn't be recommending, again, because of the ongoing prosecution, any sort of recommendation as to relates to a release of a file.
We're going to have time for 2 more questions.
Oh, Daniel, okay. Well, I certainly don't think that whether it's the grand jury or our responsibility as the investigators or prosecutors, it's to find the truth. And so when folks from outside of the Commonwealth suggest or make their preferences or their opinions known, it should have no bearing on our role as prosecutor and as investigator and fact finder. Even with folks lose sight of that, but we do have a responsibility to look at the facts as they are, and we can't be in the business. I don't think we want a justice system that is in the business of fashioning facts or laws to a particular narrative. We have to be in the business of presenting the information to the grand jury and ultimately allowing them to make a decision about what to do subsequently.
Last question.
Yes, ma'am, far in the back, I apologize. Actually, we'll take these last two here. Okay, so either one can start. Sorry.
Thank you very much, sir. I wanted to ask if you, if you believe personally that someone should have been charged with homicide or one of the similar charges in this case, and if you could please walk us through what happened after the officers knocked on the door. Did they hear an answer? How long did they wait before everything erupted? So both of those questions, please, and thank you very much.
As to your first question, again, this is about what the grand jury decided. One of the misconceptions out there is that the Attorney General's office was in the business of making charges, and that's just simply not the case under Kentucky law. Our role is to present the information to the grand jury. We dispense with that responsibility. We did it after a protracted investigation that uncovered all of the facts. That was our role. That was our responsibility. And we presented everything to the grand jury for them to ultimately make a judgment about what to do next. And in this case, in this instant, they decided to indict Detective Hankinson. As to your other question about what was provided to the grand jury, what to do next. And in this case, in this instant, they decided to indict Detective Hankinson. As to your other question about what was provided to the grand jury, I can't get into the details of the specifics on that particular issue. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. In the beginning, you said that you spoke with Breonna Taylor's family today. I know you can't tell us word for word what they said to you, but how was the news received?
Well, it was a hard meeting, and I won't go any further. I won't elaborate. But it was a difficult meeting, and look, I ran for this office. I ran because I had some singular ideas in mind, and you never know exactly what issues you'll be presented with and what challenges you'll be presented with. And today was one of those challenges, to have to sit in that room and provide the information to Ms. Palmer and two other members of the Taylor family. It's been a difficult day. This is a difficult day for everyone standing up here. This is a difficult day for those here that have to report this. And it's a very difficult day for Louisville, all of the Commonwealth, all of the country. I recognize that. And I certainly recognize the responsibility that I have to help in the healing process. As I noted in my remarks, I hope that those that are home watching, those that perhaps have ideas about being angry or pained by this decision, I hope we will respond in a manner that respects our First Amendment rights, but also respects our responsibility as the Bible talks about loving our neighbors, and that we can do so keeping Breonna Taylor's legacy in mind, but also in a way that respects our Louisville, our city, the city I live in, that respects all of our communities. So again, this is a hard day. I am under no illusion that it is not. And all I can offer is that our office uncovered every fact that was relevant to the wee hours, the morning hours of March 13th. We provided that information to the grand jury, and you all now, whether you're sitting here or whether you're at home, know the results of that process. And now we have the responsibility to prosecute that indictment, move forward in that matter. But all of us have a responsibility to work together, to find common ground, to find ways to love one another, and just be good neighbors. And so that's what I implore as you all report on this in a responsible manner. That's what I implore those that are watching on television is that we all have the responsibility of coming together now. I hope that you will take that charge seriously. Our governor likes to talk about Team Kentucky, and I believe him earnestly in that charge. And I hope that that extends to the results that were issued here today, and I hope that extends to all of our neighbors' communities. Thank you, and God bless.
We've been listening to Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron in the long-awaited presentation, his press conference on the grand jury decision in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor by police officers. Our experts join me in a moment. Let me walk through 5 things we heard.
Personal reflections about his meeting with Breonna Taylor's family. He said it was extremely difficult, and he also asked for the people there in Kentucky and in Louisville to love their neighbors, as the Bible says.
Taylor's ex-boyfriend, who was not present there at the apartment that night. And this was a no-knock warrant, but according to what we just heard from the Attorney General, it had been told to them by superiors that they needed to announce themselves. And there was, it appeared, one witness who said that yes, they did. But to hear it from Breonna Taylor's then boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who was inside, all they heard was knocking. He didn't know it was police. And they were certainly very alarmed to hear him tell it. When the door came off the hinges, he said he fired a shot, and that is a shot that hit Sergeant Mattingly in this case. He returned fire, Detective Cosgrove returned fire. And I just want Laura and Ariva for you to weigh in here, because there are still a lot of unanswered questions about why they couldn't determine who fired that fatal shot, and then also the fact that this whole process didn't even deal with obtaining the warrant, when that's really a question of why were they even there that night and how they obtained this and how they executed this. Laura, what do you think?
As they were shot at first, the Kentucky Attorney General says that these three officers were not involved in obtaining the actual warrant. They only had information relayed to them about carrying it out. And another big headline here, the Attorney General says that evidence shows that the officers knocked and announced at Breonna Taylor's apartment. It was not a no-knock warrant, which the Attorney General says was corroborated by an independent witness. The Attorney General of Kentucky revealing that Breonna Taylor was actually shot 6 times, not 5 times. Only 1 shot was considered fatal. And the Attorney General's office says it could not definitively conclude who fired that fatal shot, although the FBI determined it was Officer Cosgrove. Now, in a statement, the officers reported that they entered Breonna Taylor's apartment. A male, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, was holding a gun, arms extended in the shooting stance. Kenneth Walker apparently testified that he shot first at officers and that all the officers responded ultimately to that fire. This case will now go to a trial, 1 officer charged with multiple counts of wanton endangerment. Dana.
So the Attorney General had an imaginary trial in his mind and found the officers not guilty of any homicide charge. So we have this situation where the officer whose bullet killed Breonna is not charged with any crime. Another officer who fired in a way that endangered Breonna's neighbors is charged with a minor crime. In Kentucky, one is allowed to use self-defense if they reasonably believe that they're subject to deadly force. Remember the facts, Ari. The police burst into Breonna's apartment. There's dispute about whether they knock and announce. Cameron says that one witness says that they knock and announce. What he didn't say is that all of the other witnesses, including people interviewed by the New York Times, say that the police did not announce themselves, and that's consistent with the facts. So the boyfriend thinks there's a home invasion. He fires a warning shot that accidentally hits one officer in the leg, and because of that warning shot, the Attorney General says that all of the weapons that were fired, all of the shooting after that was justified. So nothing that happened in Breonna's house was illegal. It was not a crime. So just if 3 gangbangers had shot up an apartment complex and killed an innocent person, they would be charged with manslaughter or murder. When 3 police officers do it in Kentucky, according to the Attorney General, that's not a crime. Ari, that
send any one individual. And I think all of us across the political spectrum, it's time for us to begin to talk about what we agree on. Hey, the other thing is, Bill, I was in a position of privilege there. I was a serving military officer, and to violate that privilege during the president's term in office, I think it would have been a travesty, and it would have also compromised, I think, our professional military ethic. As a national security advisor, you're the only person in the foreign policy establishment who has the president as his or her only client. And if presidents don't trust their national security advisors, who are they going to trust? And they won't have access to the kind of advice and analysis that you want a national security advisor to be able to give the president.
There are others who have publicly disagreed with that position, but nonetheless, I respect it. Sir, thank you for your time today. Given all the news that's going around in Kentucky, thank you, sir, and good luck to you. The book is called Battlegrounds. My guest there, H.R. McMaster. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Here we go back to the breaking news in Kentucky. It was getting quite active there. Jeff Paul on scene. And Jeff, what do you see there?
Yeah, Bill, about probably 2 minutes ago, there was a confrontation between police and some of the protesters, and then things just started to crack off out here. You can see a few people on the ground right now being apprehended by police, and they have pushed protesters back now several feet into the next intersection, probably about a block back. We don't really know what sparked this sort of confrontation between police and some of the protesters. It has been very peaceful for most of the day. They've marched almost 4 miles without any really major clashes between police and the protesters out here. But then all of a sudden there was a line, police drew it, they weren't going to let them cross it, and I don't know if someone pushed into them. It kind of appeared so, but sort of a developing situation, and police are still trying to sort it out. And even further deeper in, beyond some of those police officers, more people sort of being zip tied up. You can smell what is some sort of irritant. I don't know exactly what it is, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's making you cough, it's burning your eyes, and you can tell things out here have definitely changed from what they were just moments ago. Very peaceful, spirited march out here for Breonna
Jeff,
Taylor.
let me try and get a few questions in here. How would you describe the number of protesters? Is it dozens or hundreds or higher than that, based on what you're saying?
Definitely a couple hundred, but as we were marching through the neighborhoods, you could hear the people saying, hey, come join us. And some of the people who were outside their houses joined in, got in their cars, tried to be a part of this movement, this protest. So a couple hundred people. But as far as the arrests go, I'm not seeing more than 12 people out here who are in zip ties or cuffs or whatever you want to call them. So I wouldn't say this is the mass amount of people who are being arrested. When the police started pushing back, there was a crowd of people going that way. They were getting out of here. So I don't know if these are the people who stayed or just wanted to stick around to see what happened, but I would say probably about a dozen people right now on the ground there. The rest of them pushed.
To call for peace, and while I do not want to see anyone hurt, while I don't want to see any violence take place, and I do not advocate for it, I think that it is unfair and unjust to have the conversation about how do we quell protests now, or the violence now, or the reaction, when in fact the conversation was, and always has been, why are we continuously finding ourselves in these positions?
No, I 100% hear exactly where you're coming from. I'm just now looking at this and thinking, it's 3:58 in the afternoon. Curfew is supposed to be setting in tonight. They said it's going to be put in place in the county from 9 to 6:30 in the morning for 7, and this curfew is going to go on for 72 hours.
Right.
And this is what's happening in broad daylight. I'm really scared what's going to happen this evening, Charles.
I think that, to be honest with you, there is a need for concern. I think that there is a need for concern not just in Louisville, not just in Kentucky, but across the country. Unfortunately, we saw, Kate, a significant amount of momentum that was built during the spring and summer months around the unrest in America with its racial reckoning and its conversation about race and systemic oppression. And we saw that build. And in the past few weeks, with the exception of Breonna Taylor's case and Jacob Blake's case, we've seen some of that die down. It is very likely that this could be the powder keg that sort of ignites that all over again. And, I am hopeful that perhaps it can bring the momentum back in a way that's constructive, in a way that's meaningful. But of course, you have to be mindful that there are forces at play when you're talking about sheer emotion, sheer anger that could lead to this type of destruction. And so, of course, nobody wants to see that. But again, this should serve as a reminder to the rest of the country that, hey, this conversation is far from over. It's far from finished, and we have to continue to have it. We cannot sweep it under the rug.
And that gets exactly, I have to tell you, Charles, to what Benjamin Crump and his legal team are putting out in the statement. Their final comment in their statement is, make no mistake, we will keep fighting this fight in Breonna's memory. We will never stop saying her name. Charles, thank you so much for being with me this hour. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for continuing to follow this break.
See you right back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace starts right now.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East. Anguish and frustration spilling into the streets of Louisville. Peaceful protesters are demanding justice after a grand jury ruling today in the case of Breonna Taylor's death. Taylor, of course, was shot and killed by police in her home 6 months ago. The charges, decried by protesters in Louisville as woefully insufficient. The New York Times describing shrieks of disbelief from the crowd after the announcement of those charges was made. Here they are, just one of the officers involved in the shooting at Taylor's home. Brett Hankinson was indicted on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree. Those charges, though, were for firing shots that entered other apartments, but not for firing at or killing Breonna Taylor. No officers were charged in her death. The charges were described by Taylor's family attorney, Benjamin Crump, as outrageous and offensive. Crump adding, quote, if Brett Hankinson's behavior was wanton endangerment to people in neighboring apartments, then it should have been wanton endangerment in Breonna Taylor's apartment too. In fact, it should have been ruled wanton murder. Already the reaction to today's announcement ripping through a tense nation, experiencing a moment of reckoning around issues of race and police brutality. Joining our conversation, David Henderson, a civil rights attorney and former prosecutor.
What's going on where you are?
Okay, so yeah, absolutely, and we're seeing that anger expressed here. We've been the crowd here has been marching for well over an hour, maybe an hour and a half here. And police, this is the Highlands section of Louisville, decided to cut them off. And as we approached about a block up from here, the police they built a line and they didn't allow the protesters to walk past it. And so there was a confrontation. And as you can see, Jake, it's still continuing with many of the people in the officers' faces. And then the police moved in, they made several arrests, and as you said, I did see the officers firing those pepper balls at some of the protesters as they were trying to push them back. Some of the protesters were throwing things at the police, water bottles, other items were being thrown at the police. But for the most part, and this is important, they have been marching very peacefully. The confrontation, Jake, didn't start until the police cut off the road here. We don't know why the police chose at that time to cut off the road, but you can see here in front of me, there are people still milling about, and they're trying to figure out if the police are going to let them continue past this way. But right now, the police are not. They moved in aggressively, they pushed a lot of the protesters back, and as I said, made several arrests. But again, this didn't start until the police decided to move in and close off this area, preventing many of the protesters from continuing.
Chemical agent, and you will be arrested. Should we get up here? Yeah. Louisville Metro Police Department. Why don't you get... I don't know if you can hear us out here. They've just been delivering a message that anybody in this area needs to get out if there aren't credentialed media or someone that's just a part of the protest. So you can see what's changed out here in the last few minutes or so. What's been a peaceful protest for hours and hours has now erupted into some clashes between police and a few of the protesters. I'd say about a dozen of them now find themselves with zip ties behind their backs with their hands there. The rest of the protest is several hundred people who people have marched close to 4 miles, are 1 block behind where we are standing right now. And this is where the police have sort of blocked up the protesters from moving through. For most of the day, several hours, really no interaction between police and the protesters, but police sort of drawing a line out here in this road, and protesters started moving forward, and that's when police moved in to push them back to the other light just behind us. And I should mention there is some sort of a chemical agent that they're talking about that's in the air. It definitely makes you cough, gets into your eyes. I don't know specifically what it is, but it is a deterrent to get people to move back, and they're doing that right now.
All right, I want to get the read on all of this from Judge Andrew Napolitano. First off, Judge, just what do you make of these the charges? Is this what you were anticipating?
Good afternoon, Charles. Always a pleasure to be with you. This is not what I was anticipating. I was anticipating heavier charges, particularly against the police officer who fired the gun. But let me set the picture for you. From the perspective of those inside the house, they claim there was no knock. There was just an effort to break down the door. The boyfriend, the one who fired the gun, thought that drug dealers were coming after him. He fired and missed, and as a result, the police shot back. From the police perspective, they too did not know what was on the other side of the door. They were there to serve a warrant and were authorized to use whatever force was necessary to serve the warrant. It was an arrest warrant. They were there to arrest somebody who turned out wasn't even there. When a bullet came flying through the door, their normal reaction was to shoot back. Now, can police shoot blindly? Can they shoot through a door not knowing who's on the other side? Well, that reduces homicide to some lesser charge because they were reckless in their use of force, but they had to use some force in order to stay alive. So the charge here is a relatively minor one. It's called the wanton disregard for life. I mean, this is the moral equivalent of hitting somebody with your golf club. On the other hand, there are real defenses that these police officers have. So we don't know who testified before the grand jury. We don't know what evidence the grand jury had. We don't know what the prosecutors told the grand jury. But this is the charge, the sole charge. And it's not even against the police officer that killed Breonna Taylor. It's against the police officer who fired wantonly through the door.
That would be Detective Miles Cosgrove, who apparently fired 16 shots, including the fatal shot. Kentucky's Attorney General Daniel Cameron, in a very emotional press conference, said this was a gut-wrenching decision. He had to personally put aside his emotions, and that through it all, through thousands of hours of testimony and evidence, they came to the conclusion that the two officers were justified, and I think the key word here is justified in the use of force to protect themselves. And this is the scenario you're saying, Judge, that you can see or that you can at least form in your own mind, considering what we know about the case.
Yes. The disputed issue, Charles, is whether this was whether there was a knock on the door and whether they identified themselves as police. The Attorney General of Kentucky, for whom I have a lot of respect, says that some witnesses came forward, we don't know who they are, and said there was a knock. The boyfriend of Breonna Taylor says there was no knock. There was just an effort to break down the door. Now, one person's knock may be another person's bulldozer, I don't know. But that, of course, is a very important point because that helps form the intent of the boyfriend to shoot out there. Interestingly, he was not charged, even though he fired a shot randomly through a door, not knowing who he was aiming at, the same thing that the police did, randomly through a door, not knowing who they were aiming at, except that they had a shot fired at them. I think there are real defenses to this on the part of the defendant, and I think that the government took that into account when it charged with this relatively low-level charge. We were expecting some form of homicide. We got a very low charge.
And again, this square, there's been an attempt to rename this Breonna Taylor Square. And I think what's happened here is that folks are very concerned that they're losing, again, control of their message, that it is not becoming about Breonna Taylor. And go ahead and swing it. Just show that corner right there. Nicole, there you can see folks on that corner with the baseball bats. They're dressed in a way to make a point, to make a statement. The gas masks, the long assault rifles, the baseball bats, the medical equipment, all of which is designed to get a reaction, and of course does get a reaction. And once curfew hits, and once the sun goes down, that is in the past when we have seen things turn. Obviously, the hope is that that will not happen. And again, police have made it very, very difficult to get to this downtown area. They've just made it very difficult for cars to get here. They can't get here. So you have to walk in. You have to interact with the police. We'll see if that makes a difference, Nicole.
Cal, I have two more questions for you. I've heard the frustration with the media too, and I think what you're doing is valiant and telling a really important story. But I just want to make sure I understand. The two people you just zoomed in on with baseball bats, dressed in black, with their faces covered, we hope for COVID, they're not associated with the Black Lives Matter protests, are they?
We don't know. And this is part of the confusion. And a lot of people here, and certainly the militias will tell you, we are here to protect other people. Right? Now, the president, I think, at times views folks who are dressed all in black and calls them Antifa without knowing. We don't know. We don't know that that is what people are here. I will tell you that time and time again, people will tell us we are here to protect the protesters. We are here to make sure that there is no violence. As you continue to hear people, and I just want to let some of this audio come through, Nicole, because I have never in my career ever been in a situation in this country where there is such distrust of the media, and it is so wide and it is so widespread, and people are voicing that distrust, and they're voicing that they at times do not want us here. And what complicates that, not wanting us here, is what people are wearing, are the guns, are the flak jackets. That is what I think makes it a more difficult situation. It is what makes it a more explosive situation for the officials and the authorities who, in a press conference today, had to make it clear that members of the media were exempt from the 9 p.m. curfew. And again, I love pulling back the curtain, Nicole, we were all having a conversation here. What do we do at 9 p.m.? I mean, we're already kind of being moved and shuttled around and pushed across the street, and the last thing we want to do is incite anything. All of which is just, again, to say to you, things are not only very tense here, but they're boiling over, and it's because people are frustrated because 194 days ago, a woman who was unarmed was shot inside her apartment. There was an exchange of gunfire. There were no police body cameras. There was a bad incident report, and they're just here on the streets of Louisville is an overwhelming feeling that there has not been justice for Breonna Taylor, which is what has led us to this point.
Case, they already had that suspect either in custody or knew about his whereabouts. And then at some later time, there's a discussion of whether the warrant at the time of execution was somehow changed or altered to reflect that they happened simultaneously. And so there's a question now about not only the drafting and application for a warrant, but whether there was anything or any shenanigans going on that would undermine the public's confidence in the way in which it was applied for, carried out, or later addressed. So that all that's going to be fair game. And I would note that that's part of the issues with the civil litigation and civil settlement with the family, to address how they could move forward and try to prevent these tragedies from going forward and hurting anyone else.
Neil, the ACLU reacted to today's decision, saying in part, quote, today's charging decision is the manifestation of what the millions of people who have taken to the streets to protest police violence already know. Modern policing and our criminal legal system are rotten to the core, unquote. Now, you are a former police officer. What's your reaction to that? Do you agree that modern policing and law enforcement is rotten to the core?
Well, you have to understand something about the history of policing, especially when it comes to black and brown people in this country. When you look at the history of policing in this country and where it was born from, what it was born out of, which is slave patrols in the South and protection of property in the North, the model of policing in this country has never, ever been for the benefit of black and brown people in this country. We need a new model. We need a new paradigm. And this is no slight against the men and women who work hard every day. And I'm talking about those police officers who really sign up to do good work in their communities. And believe me, we have our problem eggs. What I'm talking about is a system a system that has never been right in this country for the benefit of not just black and brown people, but poor people as well. So we got to figure this out. And there are a number of police chiefs and sheriffs across this country that are looking forward to creating a new policing paradigm, a new model of policing in this country. And we should never, ever consider doing such a thing without the input of the community, the people that we are serving. We're supposed to be one in and of the same. So the people have to dictate what that new model of policing is going to look like, how we're going to serve them going forward.
Laura, I'm being told that actually it's an Officer Cosgrove that was determined to have fired the fatal shot. So
No, and that the correction to be made, and I want to clarify that, the Attorney General did not say that he was not aware of which of the officers were firing on Breonna Taylor. The question was because only one of the shots was actually fatal. One of the 6 contributed immediately to their death. They said they weren't able to determine which of those particular, as opposed to the other officer. But in and of itself, it was irrelevant to the overall inquiry, which is the most disturbing aspect of it. And that is the idea that because they found the officers justified in using lethal force, ultimately it did not matter to them, legally speaking, who delivered the fatal shot, because they were justified in the use of force anyway. And so that's why it did not lead to a prosecution, they say. But you're right, they are able to determine which particular bullet, but the idea of whether it was relevant legally to a prosecution, it was not.
And Neil, I want to.
Jake, can I say something real quick?
Well, I want to push back on something, or not push back, or just ask you about something, and then go on and make your point. But that is, I heard an interview with Congresswoman Val Demings of Florida, former police chief, I believe from Orlando, or at least the surrounding area. And she said that she does not support defunding the police because the minority communities are the ones who depend upon police more than any other community, and that diverting funds from police would end up hurting minority communities, black and brown people. This is obviously a black woman, a former police officer, a member of Congress, police chief, member of Congress, saying that. How does that square with what you said?
So it's not just that simple. We're not just talking about taking money away from the police and doing nothing with it, is what defunding the police sounds like. What we're talking about is divesting to invest, divestment, investing. Investing in those things, those services, those needed services within our neighborhoods and communities, mental health, nutrition, education, housing, dealing with our houseless population, the homeless population, and all those things that contribute to crime. If we want to solve crime long term, improving public safety for the long term in this country, we've got to start shifting resources from public safety, from corrections, from policing, to those things within our community that I just talked about that work for improving the economic conditions, improving the health, the environmental health, and so on within those communities. That's what we're talking about here.
So Major Neil Franklin and Laura Coates, stick around. I'm going to come right back to you, and we're going to continue to cover what's going on in Louisville.
I've seen for others that are different than you. And I wanted to write a song. You know, I love that subject matter. So this.
Senators voting in the negative. Caught.
Video camera footage within 4 hours. They were ready to burn down and attack our police station. They had already started attacking our officers. But what saved us was the fact that I got up very quickly, put out the footage. So lessons learned, if police departments don't have body-worn cameras, get it. And I mean, everyone should wear them. We're in a very different time right now. No longer is it good enough to just say, well, the evidence suggests, even though I got up within 1 hour of that shooting incident, 1 hour, Charles, they were putting out a very different narrative within 45 minutes of my interview. So what's the message here?
Right.
We've got to have body-worn camera.
Yeah, and this, to your point, goes back to March. So it's been lingering for a long time, and it's been festering in the minds of people, and certainly the fact that it has taken even this long to come to this conclusion is leading to the frustration. So now we've got a curfew in place at 9 p.m. You've got the National Guard that's been activated, reports of piles of plywood at the ready. How does the police department handle what could be an explosive situation when it gets dark later on?
Well, you know, as I say, Charles, a lot of this is not reactive but proactive. I know in Detroit, we have built such strong relationships with people in our community long before something bad happened. That's the other lesson learned. What's happening right now with the delay, if you will, in putting out information, the community is suspect. Is this really happening? Is this true? And so just like what happened just a few weeks prior in Chicago when there was an officer-involved shooting and no video cam. So right now, the best counsel I'll give, and I said it here in Detroit and I'll say it again each and every time, in Detroit, we don't retreat. We stand our ground, and frankly, peaceful protests are fine. But when you instigate violence, that's where we draw the line, and in Detroit, we're not putting up with it. It's only one response to that.
Police Chief James Craig, I really appreciate it very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Hey,
I'm going to go back to Jeff Paul in Louisville. Same here with the very latest. Jeff.
Yeah, Charles, for most of the day, this has been a very peaceful demonstration. Many of these protesters, hundreds of them, marching through this.
Justice is served. And at a time like this, it's important that justice is served and that the public understands how justice is being served. Unfortunately, some of our laws need to change, and the laws do limit the outcome in this situation. However, what's not being discussed is the fact that the grand jury process is a rigged process. People tend to think, oh, it's just like serving jury duty, where you go, you're there for a day, then maybe you get to go home. If you get put on a case, you might be on a case for a week or so. Grand juries tend to serve for weeks at a time, sometimes months at a time. There's a famous trial lawyer named Joe Jamel who used to give speeches, and I've heard a number of them. And when he was at the DA's office, he said that on Mondays, they used to make jokes about how the habitual felons came in on Wednesdays. And so on Wednesday, when you present a case, the grand jury knows, oh, this must be habitual felon day. In the jurisdiction where I worked at the DA's office, you had judges who baked cookies for the grand jurors. They heard from the same prosecutors every day, over and over and over again, and got to know them, got to trust them. The reason these details are important is because not only do we not see a single charge for the death of someone who was an innocent person murdered in their home, we see charges against other people that could have been used to indict someone for also shooting at Breonna Taylor. The reason that didn't happen is because these charges are orchestrated not only to make sure that the officers face minimum criminal charges, but they are also going to face minimum punishments. When these cases go to a jury, part of what the jury is going to look at is, look, the maximum punishment for recklessly shooting into someone's home is 5 years. When they look at the fact that the person was charged with shooting into the home of someone who was not killed, they're likely going to assign a low penalty or possibly even probation for that type of offense. If the jury knew, hang on a second, this conduct led to the death of one person, even if the Attorney General was very vague about whose bullets actually killed Breonna Taylor, they'll give less punishment than they would have had the officer, had the detective also been indicted for shooting that way into Breonna Taylor's home.
David Henderson, Jason Johnson, and Cal Perry, thank you so much for your candor and your insights on what is another unbelievably surreal day. I'm grateful to all of you. After the break, even for the next
September 23rd.
Last question for you, Cindy, because I know you have to go. In my last interview with your husband, for whom you know I had great regard, I asked him how he wanted to be remembered. Take a listen. How do you want the American people to remember you?
He served his country, and not always right. Made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of errors, but served his country, and I hope we could add honorably.
I think that we can say honorably. That's tough to hear. Do you see your speaking out as fulfilling and upholding your husband's legacy of serving your country regardless of party?
Well, it's certainly his legacy, but more importantly, it's the legacy of this country. We have for years and years and years have been able to work across party lines and do what was right for the country, and that's what we're seeing not happening right now. You know, Joe and John, as I mentioned, would fight like cats and dogs sometimes on the floor, but they remained friends forever, and it's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democratic issue, it's an American issue. And that's why I'm here, and that's what I believe John felt and believed about Joe.
Cindy McCain, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're following a tense situation in Kentucky where police and protesters are facing off after today's grand jury decision in the Breonna Taylor case. We're going to go live to Louisville next. Stay with us.
They didn't say someone was in the apartment holding a gun or holding someone hostage. So there are lots of questions around this, including the Attorney General's credibility, Wolf, I have to say. This same Attorney General gave a speech at the Republican National Convention when he knew that he would be in charge of a big case and would be making an announcement in this case. I don't think that was of sound. I don't know who gave him that advice, but I don't think that was sound advice and of sound reasoning for him to be giving a speech at the Republican Convention when he knew that he would be ruling on a case like this.
Don London, thanks very much. I know you're going to have a lot more on this later tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern. We, of course, will be watching much more of our news right after this.
Kids love. And Paul might do, but we know what he's going to do. And what happens is, boom, they get in, and then we just realize we wasted 5 weeks, which is more than enough time. I mean, you could do this in 2 days. You could do this in 1 day. Just have the straight up and down vote. And even better is that it's a woman, so you can't portray her as a gang rapist, beer guzzling heathen. I guess you could say that you want to have abortions in the back alley helping the Democrats there, or that she inspired The Handmaid's Tale, which is false, but they keep saying that. But the fact is, there's no conflict. This is over. She's in. Whoever it is, Judge Janine.
You don't know who it is, but she's in. All right, we don't know who it is. But did you pick up on Dana's point, Jesse? If you look at the consequences of a court that is a 6-3 court, the Democrats say, oh, Trump wants to use this to attack mail-in votes when he loses the election. Or they're going to go after pre-existing conditions by doing away with Obamacare.
I'm not going to assume Trump's going to lose the election, so I'm not going to agree with the presumption that you're making, Juan. Also, I want to know which Republicans you're talking about that are telling the Reuters pollster that they don't want the Senate to confirm a new president. Juan, if you believe that Republicans in America don't want a Supreme Court nominee approved before the election, you look. I know you don't like polls. Look at the way that question is asked. Also, you're using the word force wrong. Force is not when a Republican president nominates a justice and a Republican Senate approves that justice. That's not a force. No. That's called the Constitution.
History. This has never been done in such a short time.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. And it's been done in a faster time.
Faster time, but never in this short interim before an election.
Not true.
The fastest 7. That's up for you next, right here on the 5.
A standard for Merrick Garland that they won't have for whomever Donald Trump announces this Saturday. But the real hypocrisy is that Donald Trump will likely spend a large part of the next 42 days trying to spread the lie that he's the most pro-life president in history. And I think in his mind that might be tied to judicial appointees. They have allowed the death of 200,000 Americans by helping Donald Trump spread disinformation that we now know from Bob Woodward, Eugene, was just that, a known lie.
A known lie. I mean, as someone who's been on the progressive side for a long time, progressives argued for a long time that Republicans are more interested in life before birth than after birth. But in this case, when we have people dying, when they have constituents dying, How can they not be moved by that, and how can they not understand that the only responsible thing for any public official to do is to try to save lives, and that means asking social distancing, the same messaging over and over again, and yet they refuse to do it. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Dr. Gupta, I'm going to go full Q&A for the Moms of America here. CDC issued guidelines on Halloween, and they separated out the various activities associated with Halloween, like trick-or-treating, as low, moderate, and very risky. They put trick-or-treating right in the middle for moderate. What's your guidance on Halloween?
And my guidance would be, and I'm seeing this happening across the country, is do scavenger hunts at home with people that you've been sheltering in place with. Avoid trick-or-treating right now. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to do that in the middle of a pandemic. And if I may, I mean, Nicole, I know you have a good holistic Q&A. I brought props here because this is the questions I'm getting about the holidays is, hey, Doc, how can we travel safely to go see grandma, grandpa, or our loved ones? And here's the truth, and this is unadulterated truth. The only way to do that, Nicole, and maybe 0.1% of the American population has access to this, is a rapid point-of-care test machine. I've shown this a few times on your show, where you can test yourself on the day that you get on a flight. Hopefully you've quarantined for about 5 days before you test yourself with one of these expensive machines. And then when you're on a flight or on a train, you're wearing an N95 mask that's well-fitted. Remember, Nicole, nobody really can access one of these because we don't have enough of them. On the flip side, when you're back seeing mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa, you want to wear a mask indoors for up to 72 hours, we think, if you're otherwise healthy. And then hopefully you have one of these guys, you retest yourself, and then you can take off the mask. Those are crude guidelines. There's no consensus. But I'm emphasizing that because how many people have an N95 mask, that's well-fitting, readily accessible? Not many. Maybe, 0.05% of the population, most of them healthcare workers. How many people have this? A high-quality testing machine? Nobody. So nobody can confidently feel like they can travel safely on a plane right now for the holidays. And that's what people care about. That's what they really care about. Nobody's talking about it.
Yeah. Dr. Gupta, Eugene Robinson, I can't say you've lifted my spirits at all, but I appreciate the candid truths.
Wolf, yesterday the Prime Minister announced strict new coronavirus restrictions, and today the numbers show just how badly they're needed. Today, the UK reported more than 6,000 new cases of the virus. That's its highest single-day tally since early May. Now, the Prime Minister promised that these new rules would also come with stricter enforcement. In fact, he's even allowing police forces to call in the military to help. This second wave of the coronavirus in the UK comes just a month before a government wage subsidy program currently supporting millions of Brits is set to expire. But today in Parliament, the Prime Minister rejected opposition calls to extend it. Wolf?
Scott McLean in London, thank you. Coming up, a growing concern about what winter may mean for the coronavirus pandemic. We'll be right back.
Experian Boost has helped millions of people. How can it help you?
California is trying to, in fact, encourage car manufacturers to head in that direction. And I think many car manufacturers, GM, Ford, they're all heading that way anyway, so it's not a big deal.
Nah, I'd do it right. Jesse?
We used to argue with Juan about the Green New Deal, and Juan used to say, Democrats don't want to outlaw the internal combustion engine. That was a rough draft. Literally a year later, California outlaws internal combustion engines in new cars. But you know what, Juan? Yeah, the Tesla, it's only, $100,000 a car. That's affordable for the middle class and the poor people. This is a war on the middle class, on the poor. It's virtue signaling, to borrow Greg's term, without the virtue, because Gavin Newsom, he's not even going to be around when they have to enforce this in 2035.
Oh, do you know something we don't?
Well, he'll be alive. I don't think he'll be governor.
Maybe he'll be president.
You never
He
know.
probably will.
It is the People's Republic of California. If there was any state where they could amend the state constitution to make him emperor, it would be the Golden State.
So California cannot dictate interstate commerce just by the fact that they're a huge state and you leverage their size. And in fact, the courts have proven this over and over again. And so they keep trying. And the automobile industry is like, look, we want to get to lower emissions too, but you can't push us as far because you have to also remember safety. That is a big consideration. And when it comes to like Tesla, I know that Musk is working on a battery so that the car would only cost $25,000. Here is my condition.
No more federal taxpayer dollars going to these companies to make cars that cost $100,000. Enough.
Yay, well said. Taxation is theft. Dana, that was a great, thank you. So, Greg, you will only drive gas-powered cars.
That is true.
Especially in 2035.
Can't tell how much I love gas. But why do liberals always, their first instinct is to ban something? It's like Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, free market minds, they want to solve the problem. Hence Musk. I give credit to Musk. He wants to make an economical battery, you know? But no, Gavin says, let's just ban the car. And it's such a hypocrite. He's such a hypocrite because he has more petroleum in his hair than what you could fill an Cadillac Eldorado tank with. So he's, of course, nobody's going to take away his fuel, his hair fuel.
Yeah, talk about someone who's full of hot gas, Gavin.
Tell me about it.
One more thing is up next. Stay with us.
Rev your engines. Transport tax-free cash and stay in the home you love.
Go to Prudential.com.
Eating or plan to become pregnant. Common side effects include low red blood.
Every pet knows that humans cannot survive without.
Was standing in front of this enormous device that I grabbed.
Justify.
Sometimes the criminal law is not adequate to respond to a tragedy.
Fauci fires back. The nation's top infectious disease doctor rebukes a senator for spreading misinformation.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repetitively in the past.
The nation's health officials testify today and reveal 90% of Americans could still get the coronavirus. Plus, optimism for a one-dose vaccine as Johnson & Johnson begins its late-stage trial. Honoring Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Tonight, the emotional farewell begins. The young girls who were inspired to pay tribute, and more than 100 of her law clerks line the steps of the Supreme Court to say goodbye. The Chief Justice memorializes a woman he called a fighter during her 27 years on the court.
Ruth wanted to be an opera virtuoso, but became a rock star instead.
Plus, why the president says we need 9 justices before the election. Heart-stopping rescue, how one trucker saved another from a burning rig with no time to spare. And a special centenary, a lesson on living life to the fullest.
Respects. The news out of California tonight, the governor issuing a new executive order banning the sale of new gas-fueled cars in 15 years. And we remember a Hall of Fame football star right here tonight.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a Wednesday night. We have a lot to get to. That solemn tribute to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what the Chief Justice John Roberts said today, and that tense exchange on Capitol Hill involving Dr. Anthony Fauci. But we begin tonight with the fierce reaction in Louisville at this hour after the grand jury's decision in the death of Breonna Taylor, indicting one of 3 officers, but not in her death. Breonna Taylor, a Louisville EMT, was shot dead after officers serving a warrant opened fire. A grand jury weighing charges against the 3 officers on the scene, indicting one of them, not in her death, indicting the officer on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree against now former Officer Brett Hankison for shooting into Taylor's apartment, charged because of the bullets that threatened neighboring tenants. Tonight, the lawyer for Taylor's family calling the decision outrageous and offensive. You can see protesters there in the streets. The National Guard is standing by. There is a curfew in place for the next 72 hours, and ABC's Alex Presnow leading us off from Louisville.
Tonight, outraged protesters taking to the streets of Louisville after a grand jury indicted one of the 3 officers involved in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor, but not in her death.
I'm very, very sad. Very, very mad.
Police detaining multiple demonstrators. That now former Officer Brett Hankison charged with allegedly endangering neighbors in Breonna's apartment complex after he violated department policy, opening fire without a clear aim or shot.
Detective Hankinson fired his weapon 10 times, including from a outside sliding glass door and through a bedroom
window. Hankinson indicted on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree. None of the charges are connected to Breonna's death. The grand jury finding the 2 other officers involved in the botched March 13th raid, Detective Miles Cosgrove, who shot 16 times, and Sergeant John Mattingly, who shot 6 times, were justified in firing their weapons.
The sequence of events from March 13th had to be pieced together through ballistics evidence, 911 calls, police radio traffic, and interviews.
Breonna's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, says he fired a warning shot from his legally owned gun because police did not announce themselves when they barged in that night executing a search warrant. But the Attorney General saying a civilian witness told investigators officers did knock and identify themselves.
When officers were unable to get anyone to answer or open the door to apartment 4, the decision was made to breach the door.
Mattingly, the only officer to enter the apartment, saw Breonna and Walker.
He says that the male was holding a gun, arms extended, in a shooting stance. Sergeant Mattingly saw the man's gun fire, heard a boom, and immediately knew he was shot.
That's when authorities say the officers opened fire, killing Breonna.
Our investigation showed, and the grand jury agreed, that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in the return of deadly fire after having been fired upon by Kenneth Walker.
He said his investigation did not examine how that warrant was obtained. The grand jury decision, demonstrators say, not enough. Many overcome with emotion hearing the news today.
In my heart, it doesn't feel like there's any justice for Breonna, and that because they never brought up any murder charges.
Breonna's family attorney in a statement calling today's decision offensive and another example of no accountability for the genocide of persons of color by white police officers. This comes more than 24 hours after Mattingly sent an email to LMPD personnel obtained by ABC affiliate WHAS, writing, "I know we did the legal, moral, and ethical thing that night. It's sad how the good guys are demonized and criminals are canonized." Tonight, the Kentucky governor activating the National Guard in Louisville and an evening curfew in place.
All right, looking to Alex Perez with us from Louisville tonight.
Vaccine will prove safe and effective by late this year or early next year. We get more now from CBS's Mola Lengi.
Today, the nation's top health officials in the hot seat.
In the end, FDA will not authorize or approve a vaccine that we would not feel comfortable giving to our families.
If I take a shot to get the vaccine, does that give me COVID?
Absolutely not. That would be impossible.
The head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Anthony Fauci, sparring with Senator Rand Paul over New York City's low test positivity rate.
They are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors, more indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've developed enough community immunity that they're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator. Please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You are not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
As drug makers race to develop a vaccine, the FDA is expected to issue tougher standards for approval.
FDA will not authorize or approve any COVID-19 vaccine before it has met the agency's rigorous expectations for safety and effectiveness.
I think that's going to take us April, May, June, possibly July to get the entire American public completely vaccinated.
Today, Johnson & Johnson became the 4th vaccine maker to begin the final stages of trials. Their vaccine would require a single dose and not have to be stored in sub-zero temperatures, unlike other vaccines.
Even if we do this so fast, it's still done very rigorous. We don't cut corners. We do what we need to do in order to show safety and efficacy.
Well, new cases continue to rise, now in 28 states, plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. There's also an uptick here in New York City, where 20% of those new cases are concentrated in just 4 neighborhoods, Nora.
Mola Lengi, thank you. Today, there was an emotional and moving scene that played out on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court as thousands lined up to pay their final respects to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. President Trump is expected to visit on Thursday, while late this afternoon, Vice President Pence and Karen Pence joined the mourners. We get more now from CBS's Jan Crawford.
There was a quiet reverence as Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg arrived at the Supreme Court for the last time. Lining the steps, more than 100 former law clerks during her 27 years as a justice, helping usher their mentor into the Great Hall. All 8 justices, her family, friends, paid tribute in a private ceremony. Chief Justice John Roberts mixed his remarks with affection and humor.
Among the words that best describe Ruth, tough, brave, a fighter, a winner, but also thoughtful, careful, compassionate, honest. When it came to opera, insightful, passionate. When it came to sports, clueless.
Maureen Scalia, widow of the late Justice Antonin Scalia, known for his legendary friendship with Ginsburg and their shared love of opera, was among the mourners.
She was not an opera star, but she found her stage right behind me in our courtroom. There she won famous victories that helped move our nation closer to equal justice, and yet still Ruth is gone, and we grieve.
Outside the court, crowds gathered in an outpouring of their own, including the president who nominated her, Bill Clinton, with his wife, Hillary. They grieved at the loss of a champion, a hero, an inspiration for generations of women. The line was shortened as people filed by, paying their respects. Justice Ginsburg will lie here in repose until tomorrow night, her former clerks standing by for the public to give thanks. Her final act at the court and a life of service.
Jan Crawford joins us now from the Supreme Court. And Jan,
agree and everything becomes political. I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, I want to see something done that's going to save lives. I think the FDA had signaled some time ago they were going to issue some additional guidance about the safety guidance ought to be for these phase 3 trials. They previously said what the efficacy limit had to be. It had to be at least 50% effective, but they hadn't laid out what the safety guidance would be. They've kind of gone with tradition here, this idea that you're going to ask for 2 months of data on at least half of the people in the trial before you decide that you've got a good bit of data about safety. That's not a new idea. And so putting that forward at this point was not a big surprise, although they have not formally issued that. I guess it kind of came out into the open in the last 24 hours as something that they were drafting and considering. My concern is that...
But let me interrupt for a moment, Dr. Collins. Does the White House, as opposed to the FDA, have final word on approval of a vaccine?
I am not a lawyer or a constitutional scholar. I actually don't know the answer to that. I guess Sanjay didn't either. But certainly the FDA, with the agency that has the experience and the scientific expertise, is in the best position to judge these issues about safety and efficacy. And certainly the public is looking at that. And we already have a problem in this country where a lot of people are worried about whether this vaccine is going to be something they want to take. The last thing we need to do is to create another cloud of uncertainty about whether this is being done appropriately, so that we can reassure people this is something they'd want to take advantage of.
Because we have to make sure, Dr. Collins, we have to make sure that this vaccine, and there are 6 potential vaccines that are being tested right now in various phases. We have to make sure it's safe for adults, for little kids, for children, safe for the elderly, safe for people with underlying conditions like diabetes, for example, or health or heart conditions. It has to be safe, and there has to be confidence that it works. And the American public's going to be nervous if they see politics at play right now, right?
That has already caused, I think, some concern on the part of the public, and we'd really like to get that settled by laying out very clear standards. So it should be noticed that the CEOs, all the companies that are producing these vaccines, have already come out themselves and said they're not going to push something forward they don't think is safe and effective. I noticed in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that was announced today that in their protocol, they include this idea that they're not going to ask for approval until they have 60 days of follow-up after the study. They've already incorporated that particular part of the safety standard into their protocol. They're already big.
Yeah, and the president made her just know he's not very happy with that 2-month review process. He wants it out there. He wants it out by November 3rd. He's made that clear many times. Dr. I'll stand by. Gloria Borger is with us as well.
Close together, hardly any social distancing, very few masks. As, again, head of the coronavirus task force, your recommendation is for people, Americans, to stay away from large gatherings. How do you justify scenes like this?
Well, the recommendations of the coronavirus task force from early on have been state-specific. We've trusted governors in our states, and most importantly, we've trusted the American people.
The governor of Nevada urged the president not to have the indoor rally there, and he said that, quote, the president was putting countless lives in danger.
Well, we're in an election year, and not surprisingly, some politics is being played. We can trust the American people to make the right decisions.
Lindsay Davis with the Vice President. Let's get right to John Carl again tonight. And John, you showed our new poll there, the race virtually tied in Arizona. The president ahead by 1 point among likely voters. Let's look at Florida tonight as well, where President Trump leads Joe Biden among likely voters, 51 to 47%. And John, Florida is always a key battleground.
Florida, David, is a state that Donald Trump almost certainly must win if he is to get reelected. That's why his campaign is spending more money in Florida than any other state. Joe Biden could plausibly lose Florida and still win the election, but that would mean a very close race and potentially a very long election night that could stretch on for days and days.
Yes,
David?
We are all preparing. John, thank you. We're going to move on now to the solemn tribute at the Supreme Court today for the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. More than 100 of her former law clerks lining the steps, serving as honorary pallbearers. Her flag-draped coffin carried inside where family and fellow justices heard Chief Justice John Roberts praising her for moving our nation closer to equal justice under the law. Paying their respects, former President Bill Clinton and Secretary Clinton, the former president nominating Ginsburg, of course, and Hillary Clinton acknowledging in recent days her role in encouraging her husband to select Ginsburg. And the signal from the conservative Chief Justice on the tone set by Justice Ginsburg and what she did for her country. Terry Moran has long covered the court.
At the Supreme Court this morning, a tableau of honor and grief. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's former law clerks arrayed across the sunlit plaza, her honorary pallbearers, as she returned one final time to the court she served so long. Members of the Supreme Court police force carried the casket up the stairs into the Great Hall, followed by her family. All her colleagues and former Justice Anthony Kennedy gathering for the traditional Jewish ceremony. Then Chief Justice John Roberts spoke briefly and simply of his longtime colleague and unlikely pop icon, the notorious RBG.
It has been said that Ruth wanted to be an opera virtuoso, but became a rock star instead.
The Chief Justice speaking for the court and the country.
Of course, she will live on in what she did to improve the law and the lives of all of us. And yet, still, Ruth is gone, and we grieve.
Then the casket was carried outside to the top of those long stairs for the public to pay their final respects. Former President Bill Clinton, who appointed Ginsburg to the court, along with Hillary Clinton, who encouraged him to make that nomination, joining the mourners. Across the street in the Capitol, the battle for Ginsburg's replacement is raging, with Republicans all but certain to seat a new Trump justice before the election, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer lashing out at them.
They're fighting to reverse Judge Ginsburg's legacy, not honor it. All their speeches of praise were totally hollow.
And President Trump today declaring that he wants his nominee confirmed quickly and the conservative majority solidified in case the election results are disputed.
I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices.
And among the first big cases on the docket here, whether the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, should be struck down in its entirety, leaving 130 million Americans without guaranteed access to health care. President Trump supports that effort. He pledges to protect those Americans. He says he's got a plan for it. He said that a year ago, David, and there's no sign of it yet.
And we can still see that line of mourners right there behind you, Terry. Thanks for that today.
So we're going to be staying pretty cool to close out for October. In Aberdeen, 70s the next few days, but then you're back in the 60s beginning on Monday. And look at some of these mornings coming up next week. 30s, even getting close to that freezing mark. And in Pier, the mid-80s tomorrow, 70s for Friday and the weekend, and you two dealing with the 60s by the middle of next week. Dakota News Now continues right after this.
Dakota News Now is sponsored by Blinds Plus Design.
Thought did a formidable job explaining some things today, but I think the governor of Kentucky came back a little later and asked that maybe there should be more transparency around all of this, and the investigation that he conducted, that he should talk a little bit more about how and even reveal the findings online. The hard part for me, Brett, as I think about all of this is, number one, I hope we don't lose the notion of how much and how important police reform is and how police officers are able to act on warrants. They have a very tough job, and we should not make it harder by them not wearing body cameras and not fully understanding how and when these warrants are executed. And I guess on a very personal level, Breonna Taylor was an EMT. It's hard to imagine that if police officers were knocking on her door and banging on her door in the middle of the night, that she wouldn't have responded. Maybe she might have thought they were asking her help for some reason, and not just wanting to conduct some sort of search of her own home. I can only hope that the findings are made more transparent and that we don't lose sight of what we're trying to get solved here, which is we as a country have to take a step back and understand the kind of reforms all of us need to make the country safer and to make every American feel comfortable when a policeman knocks on his or her door.
Molly, we covered a settlement from the Louisville City Council with Breonna Taylor's family. Now this indictment, but it's obviously not going to be good enough for some folks.
Well, people's perception about this case, this tragedy of this death, were shaped largely by false reports that it was a no-knock raid. And people have come to see the problems with those no-knock raids, and they thought it was one of those. That wasn't the case. Half the system of justice in this country and due process and trial by mob is not part of that system. Review by a grand jury of evidence, a defense at a trial, indictments, a full jury reviewing a case, those are important parts of it. It has been very disappointing to see so many people just willing to throw out this very important system of due process that protects people whether you like them or whether you don't like them, and is really the foundation of this country. And the proper, this is the proper way for things to proceed, when calm minds can review the evidence and come out with a determination.
All right, I want to turn to the Supreme Court nomination. It's saying he is not meeting with Barbara Lagoa, one of the people on his list in Washington. That was kind of an interesting thing just in the press briefing. Amy Coney Barrett is seen as a leading contender right now. Here is the Senate Majority Leader and Minority Leader.
The sky is falling when a Democratic president does not get to confirm every last judge he or she wants. And the sky is falling when a Republican president gets to confirm any judgment.
Why are the committee programs so egregious that it risks shedding the last vestiges of trust that remain between our two parties? For what? Because this is the only way for Republicans to achieve their radical right-wing agenda.
Jonah, I think people need a whiteboard to what is being said now, to what has been said in 2016 and Kavanaugh and everything else. Where do you think this falls out?
Together time, a chance to...
Some economic withdrawal might need to take place on a national level.
Well, I want to get your thoughts, Martin, on something the Kentucky Attorney General Cameron said at today's announcement. Now, listen to this.
We must also remember the facts and the collection evidence in this case are different than cases elsewhere in the country. Each is unique and cannot be compared. There will be celebrities, influencers, and activists who, having never lived in Kentucky, will try to tell us how to feel, suggesting they understand the facts of this case and that they know our community and the Commonwealth better than we do, but they don't.
At the news conference, you just heard, Martin, the president strongly praise the Kentucky Attorney General, who spoke at the Republican National Convention here in Washington, saying he's doing exactly the right thing. I think he's doing a great job. He's a superstar. Paraphrasing what the president had to say, and he says he's going to be speaking to the Kentucky governor soon. So what's your reaction to what we heard from the Attorney General and what we heard from the president?
Certainly believe that because he did speak at the convention, and I'm not saying that anyone does not have that right, but it certainly took him out of being objective to obviously supporting, you know, the nominee of his party. And so I think it says, and yes, I heard a statement about people may not understand Kentucky, but people do understand the loss of a human life, a female in this context, when justice has not been served. There is no justice in this. There's not justice yet, I should say, because we don't know. The FBI is still doing an investigation. But thus, it's just very sad that in 2020, we're still going through some of the same things that happened years ago. The fact that you can just knock down and go in and shoot someone is unconscionable. And I think the system has to be addressed, meaning the system must be broken down. And that means creating a new and better system that works for all people.
What would your father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Martin, say if he were with us today? And we're sad that he's not with us today, but if he were with us today, what would be his message to those angry folks on the street of Louisville right now who are so upset with the decision by the grand jury and the Kentucky judge?
I don't know that any of us can say what he would say, but I know that he would think and understand the anger, because many of us are angry and frustrated. But we have to find ways to transform that anger into something transformational that brings about change. That's why, you know, in 1955, there was a boycott for 381 days where people didn't ride buses. This is different because it's about a human life that cannot be replaced, but justice can occur. And so, you know, when you think about the fact that black people spent $1 trillion in this economy, over $1 trillion last year, and if black people decided that maybe we need to stop spending our money in this economy, then maybe the system can be restructured appropriately and justice can be served for all.
Is that something, Martin, you're proposing, that you support some sort of huge economic boycott as well?
I have certainly heard discussions about it. I think that is a very real viable option that could happen. I am not saying I'm calling for that. I am saying that I'm hearing all of these discussions today. And there may be an effort of a number of people coming together and say, you know, look, this is something we must do, because that is one of the nonviolent actions that probably will create changes in this issue.
So what do you think, what else do you think potentially could come next for the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States in the wake of this decision in Kentucky, which so many folks, and you can see them on the streets of Louisville right now, find so deeply disappointing?
Well, the biggest thing is, you know, you got the George Floyd Policing Act that's sitting at the desk of Mitch McConnell, and he refused to hear that, and the John Lewis Voter Registration Act that's sitting there as well. The House passed, but Mitch McConnell won't allow that. Therefore, the people in Kentucky must mobilize and decide to vote for us. But that also means all the way through the ballot. I mean, there's some who think that the Attorney General, when he's up for election, may not need to be reinstated or reelected. I think those are some of the things that have to happen. But it's not just a political solution. Again, I say this is a structural. This is around the policies, even the policy around law and law enforcement. Because everyone wants law enforcement that works. And law enforcement is not working in communities of color. And in this context, as it relates to black women.
Martin Luther King III, Martin, as usual, thanks so much.
If you're not waking up with Eric, Vanessa, and Aaron every weekday morning on Dakota News Now, maybe it's time to make the switch. Eric and Vanessa have the news you need to start your day off right. And Eric has your hour-by-hour forecast, getting you ready for whatever the weather will bring. Dakota News Now, weekday mornings from 5 to 7. It's news when you want it.
Investigate TV tackles the top topic.
It is time for this body to do its job. It's time for us to stand up.
What we expect from a Trump-appointed judge is the opposite. work.
Award-winning journalist Lee Zurich. We're your watchdog. Download Investigate TV for your Roku and Amazon Fire license.
The First Alert Weather Team is working.
City councilors Christine Erickson and Greg Neitzert are spearheading the city's efforts to counteract a number of panhandlers that seem to be taking over some of Sioux Falls' busiest intersections.
Go.
As simple as just citing or arresting folks who are causing problems.
People think that we can just simply tell people that they can't do it. It's not unconstitutional to stand in a public place and hold a sign, regardless of what it says. It is.
Tonight, shock after no officers are charged in Breonna Taylor's death. Police and protesters clashing after one of 4 officers indicted. Not for killing Taylor, but for bullets that flew into her neighbor's apartment. Louisville under a state of emergency, a curfew going into effect. The reaction tonight from Taylor's family. The race for a COVID vaccine, the nation's top health experts on Capitol Hill vowing not to bow to political pressure to rush approval. Johnson & Johnson and final trials. What makes theirs different? Dr. Fauci is fighting moment today, and late word the Republican governor testing positive. The powerful tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the justice arriving at the Supreme Court for the final time. Hundreds paying respects. President Trump racing to replace Ginsburg before the election, suggesting the court may decide the election. The president also attacking Cindy McCain, widow of John McCain, for endorsing Joe Biden as polls in key battlegrounds tighten. Our NBC News investigation, the type of ballot rejected, staggering numbers in 2016, how to protect your vote. And the holiday shopping wars already heating up in the pandemic. When to get the best deals.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. This year of reckoning over the violent deaths of Black Americans at the hands of police, the case of Breonna Taylor shook so many to their core. An innocent woman shot to death in her own home last March during a late-night attempt by police to execute a warrant. Today, we learned none of the fire will be charged in her death. Grand jury instead choosing to indict one now former Louisville police officer on lesser charges unrelated to the shots that killed Taylor. The reaction in Louisville tonight swift and much of it angry. Gabe Gutierrez is there.
Tonight, Louisville is on edge. Police and riot are making arrests after the long-awaited announcement. No officers charged for causing Breonna Taylor's death. Some protesters in tears as the National Guard rolled in. Tensions are rising here. The city of Louisville has sealed off about 24 blocks in the downtown area, and right over there is where violent demonstrations broke out over the past several months. The state's investigation had focused on 3 officers who fired their weapons during the drug raid at Taylor's apartment in March. The grand jury only indicted Officer Brent Hankinson, who was fired from the department this summer, charging him with 3 counts of wanton endangerment for firing shots that ended up in a neighboring apartment with 3 people inside, including a pregnant woman. If convicted, he faces up to 5 years in prison on each count. Detective Miles Cosgrove and Jonathan Mattingly were not charged at all. No comment from attorneys for Cosgrove. But Mattingly's attorney said today they did their duty, performed their roles as law enforcement officers, and above all, did not break the law. Kentucky's Attorney General said today his investigation found that officers did knock and announce themselves, contradicting Kenneth Walker, Taylor's boyfriend, who insists the officers did not announce themselves before bursting the apartment. Walker fired his licensed gun, saying he feared an intruder and injuring Mattingly. The officers then returned fire.
Our investigation found that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in their use of force after having been fired upon by Kenneth Walker.
Walker's attorney called it a cover-up. Authorities say Taylor was shot 6 times, and the Attorney General says an FBI analysis determined that Detective Cosgrove fired the shot that killed her. But local authorities did not reach the same conclusion,
creating a reasonable doubt in the evidence about who fired the fatal shot.
Taylor's family, who last week agreed to a $12 million civil settlement, held for charges of at least second-degree manslaughter. The family's lawyer is calling today's decision outrageous and offensive.
We still have work to do. We still are pushing for justice for Breonna. We still have the FBI investigation.
The grand jury met in secret following months of emotional protests.
Is
this what you expected?
Yeah, did, but I had a little hope. Just a little bit.
They knew they weren't supposed to be there. They knew they weren't supposed to even be there.
Tonight, anger here is boiling over for those who feel they waited for nothing. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, Louisville, Kentucky.
I'm Blake Alexander in Louisville, where tonight the National Guard is moving in as outrage spills into the streets. Police and protesters clashing, officers firing tear gas and making arrests. The marches began almost immediately and are not letting up. Was it surprising for you? No, it's not surprising. Very rarely do black people get justice when it's the police. Breonna Taylor has been almost larger than life. Her face gracing the Emmys and magazine covers. Her name on some of sports' biggest stages. Even in the skyline of her hometown, 26 billboards purchased Oprah. Today, Attorney General Neil Cameron pushed back on the outside attention.
There will be celebrities, influencers, and actors who have never lived in Kentucky. They try to tell us how to feel, suggesting they understand the facts of this case and that they know our community and the Commonwealth better than we do.
But many streets tonight say this is simply not justice. Every single person who fears police and being murdered by police deserves better than what we got today.
And Blaine now joining me from Louisville. We've seen emotions running high there. How are authorities planning to keep the peace there this evening?
Well, Lester, as you can see tonight, there is a tremendous police presence here downtown. The city is also under a 9 p.m. curfew tonight, and the National Guard has been activated. We've also learned that as of this afternoon, former Officer Brett Higginson was taken into custody. He's already been released on bail. Lester?
We hope everyone stays safe. Blaine. Tonight we're learning the governor of Missouri and his wife have positive for COVID amid concerns about a surge. The country's top public health officials told Congress today science will prevail over politics in their fight against the virus. Tom Costello has
out of control, and that there's nothing being done to fix that. I know you've tried to address that, but what would you say tonight to these people who are obviously very upset?
I think this is a bad situation. We put police into a bad situation, and also the people on the other side of the door, Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, in a bad situation. The best way to do this is to reform the law. So Louisville has banned no race. Now they're looking at how this warrant was obtained. I've introduced and also to get rid of no not race, try to prevent some tragedy like happening again. But I think all responding in a way. The specific details, I can't judge innocence, and ultimately this is the beginning. A jury will have to decide that. Those details are best left to a jury without politicians and everybody else weighing in on guilt or innocence. But I don't want this to happen again. And I'm working hard to try to either federal law or local law prevents from happening.
Well, we remember when we were accosted by protesters in the street who wanted you to chant her name, and they were obviously not aware of the work that you've been doing on behalf of these Breonna Taylor Act, which you initiated. I want to speak a little bit about COVID and which you were part of. This is an exchange that you had with Dr. Fauci.
How can we possibly be jumping up and down and saying, oh, who did a great job? It's the worst death rate in the world.
No, it's true that, Senator, and you've done repetitively. They are looking at the guidelines that we have put together.
Or to enough community.
I challenge that, Senator. And you 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
So, you went after him on the subject of Governor Cuomo and the record in New York, which I think a lot of New Yorkers can understand. You also went after him on this question as a doctor on what percentage does connote herd immunity, and you guys went back and forth on it. Tell me about that.
Well, the facts are the facts. From the Johns Hopkins website, and people say the facts. The highest death rate in the world is in New York, 1,700 deaths per million. The U.S. average about 500. The average, or actually about 600 now. the average in about 570. But immunity, they're just. But I'm sending over to Dr. Fauci. Read a little bit on this. In Science magazine in August, 3 mathematicians came out with the idea that because an infection, transmission of infections and immunity seem to be concentrated in younger people, they seem to catch this faster and be more active and out in public more, that it actually skews the formulas on herd immunity and would allow herd immunity at a much lower rate. The other thing from the Johns Hopkins website you see is New York's had no new incidents and no new deaths. Now, he wants to say, oh, it's because they're washing their hands. Right. I don't believe that. I think they were washing their hands in April and we started all these deaths. So there's something going on, and I can't say with certainty, but over the next couple of months, if there is no significant surge again without a vaccine in New York, it will look like herd immunity. That's what it looks like in Sweden right now. And it looks like this around the world when people have had a significant surge, not getting a second surge, and there are mathematicians who have looked at the formula on herd immunity in the August edition of Science Journal, and they actually say, you know what, herd immunity may come much lower.
I think fascinating, and I think only time will really tell. I did read that study as well. Before I let you go, can you give us your thoughts on the Hunter Biden investigation? There was a preliminary report findings, and it didn't seem to find anything that connected him to anything illegal.
Well, I don't know. I think riding on Air Force 2 and doing business is illegal. I think that is against the law. Probably. I think it's illegal to take money from a Russian politician's wife, $3.5 million. Was it reported accurately? I think the only way to determine the actual legality of this is to have it referred to the Department of Justice. So I'm going to send the report over. I don't know if the whole committee will vote for it, but I'm sending the report tomorrow to the Department of Justice, and we're asking for a criminal referral. We want to see that if there's a criminal investigation that's justified, here's this evidence, look at it, and then you're the lawyers for the government. You decide if you have enough to prosecute. But I think we should refer this for a criminal investigation.
No, I gotta leave it there.
At it best. I mean, this was an atrocity. And I watched that press conference this morning and noticed that there were more words and more time given to activists, celebrities, and influencers who don't know what's happening in Kentucky and giving the actual facts of what's happening in this case, giving condolences to this family that just last week was paid out $12 million in a civil suit because it acknowledges that there was wrongdoing here. And so again, I think what I saw this morning was a Bull Connor speech in 2020. And you're right, unfortunately, it was being given by a black prosecutor. I think what's important for us to understand here is that what actually ends up happening is that the misdoings and the acts of get sloughed off onto communities. Communities like this end up paying millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars for police misconduct and police violence and police abuse. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing here is a case of collusion. This is how police officers are not held accountable when they commit crimes in our communities. And what we've found in the Black census is that is what Black communities want to see. Police officers being held accountable when they commit crimes in our communities. And so to answer your question about what is going to happen in terms of activism, people are going to keep fighting. They're going to keep organizing, and they're going to keep pushing. We saw something very typical in it this morning in the press conference, where there was a task force announced to study the problem. And quite frankly, my mentors have always said that task forces are the places where accountability and good ideas go down. And so that's actually what has happened here. Deeply unfortunate.
Yeah. That seems like Cameron's goal here is to just let it die. Let's point out in 2019, about $300 million in tax money used to cover financial settlements for police conduct in America from 2005 to 2018. Of the 98 police officers who were arrested following a fatal on-duty shooting, only three were convicted of murder, and 35 officers who were convicted of electric manslaughter and homicide instead of murder. So it's much more likely that cities have pay out. They'd rather just pay with taxpayer money than do justice. And you have the civil settlement actually the only way there's been any change in policing. Cameron hasn't done a damn thing, honestly. You've been doing this a long time, Rev. Your thoughts?
My thoughts, first of all, one of the reasons that we are saying that you need to remove the immunity from police is if police themselves are subject to some of these lawsuits. their family telling them we can lose the house, we can lose the car. Don't go out there and act in a way that is aggressive and against the law, which we were able to get past in New York State finally. We're still pursuing that nationally. And the thing that was offensive to me is that the whole rallying cry, thanks to Alicia and her two brilliant partners of Black Lives Matter that started the night of George Zimmerman's acquittal, is that they came back today saying no, Black lives don't matter, because the life that was lost was not even addressed in this indictment. It was those that might have had collateral damage while we killed somebody, but we're not going to address the criminality of killing that person because they don't matter. That woman doesn't matter. Even though we were not even after her, even though the person we claimed to be after was not there and in fact in custody, it doesn't matter on a criminal level. The other thing to say that celebrities and activists and influencers come in that don't know them, we were called in by the people. The family of Ghana called people in. And Kentucky has no problem if we come to Kentucky, go to the Kentucky Derby and watch some horses run around behind each other. But don't come in there for a black woman who's been killed. But they're going to have the activist derby in Louisville, just like they have the Kentucky Derby, because the value of that black woman's life is more deep than it is a horse. Rihanna's one of our first interviews, if not her first one on Politics Nation. She spoke at our march just 3 weeks ago in Washington. They have brought their plea to all of us, and we're going to respond. One of the ways we respond, and I hope we don't have violence because I don't want to see any of us become like what we're fighting. But we need to really understand that this prosecutor's mentor, Mitch McConnell, is on the ballot this in about 6 weeks, right there in Kentucky. And they need to put some of that energy toward voting and sending a message. In the name of Breonna, we retire Mitch McConnell, the majority leader. That's a step to showing how serious we are. It's not justice for that family, but it's a step that we are serious about what we're doing.
Yeah, and Mr. Warren called that the prosecutors involved in the Tapir Rice case and the Michael Brown case, they lost their jobs based on their behavior. So he's got 4 more years to go. Just got in, but he should just keep that in mind. You're absolutely right. It is so very Southern that a bullet in the wall is more of a crime than a bullet, 6 bullets out of the body of Breonna Taylor. A very Southern, old-fashioned and in antebellum sort of way kind of decision. Reverend Al Sharpton, Alicia Garza, Paul Butler, thank you very much. It's on the readout.
To help you do more business online. Powered on with Constant Contact. Try it free today.
/plan your vote. Lester?
All right, Cynthia, thanks. Up next, rewriting the playbook for holiday shopping. We'll tell you what's in store.
Don't test asymptomatic individuals. We're doing everything we can to improve testing of asymptomatic individuals, but it's important to have that with some degree of public health knowledge, because if you test negative today, it doesn't mean you won't be negative tomorrow. And so there really was not a reversal in that guideline.
So what happened with that? The language did change. I mean, originally it said,
yes,
you know, the suggestion was that if you don't have symptoms, you don't have to get tested. So what changed?
It never said that. It said that, and again, this is CDC guidance that was generated by the CDC. It said that you may not necessarily need to be tested. Look, Martha, if I just got exposed and I went and isolated in my apartment for 14 days, I didn't see anyone, I stayed there, do I need a test? I really don't need a test. I'm not going to expose anyone, I'm not sick. But what we saw was the guidance was misinterpreted, it was misrepresented, and we saw all kinds of ill activity stemming from that. The CDC director, Dr. Redfield, clarified it the next day, and as it kept getting misrepresented and it started propagating, he decided to update guidance and clarify even more. Nothing more than that.
The other issue was the issue of social distance, that, you know,
yes,
maybe 6 feet was more necessary, and that it could or could not be spread through aerosol. I mean, the bottom line is, have you ever been in a situation where you felt that the White House was saying to your task force, no, that we don't like that, it's not going to go over well, it's going to prevent some of the reopening that we need to see. Have you ever been in that situation?
No, I really have not been in that situation. The task force meetings are very interactive. There's a lot of discussion, and we talk about the implications of policies. But the doc group meets frequently. We pass along guidance. We talk about the implications of it. We've never been pressured. I've never been told by the president to stop testing or to change a guidance or to alter the facts. It just doesn't happen like that. Every task force meeting opens with Dr. Birx looking at all the evidence. What is the epidemiology? It's typically followed by Dr. Fauci, and then it goes through all the different docs and policy areas. So it's very evidence-based, very data-driven. I don't feel pressured. And none of us on the task force, none of the docs on that task force would bow to pressure.
Well, let me
we
just
have long careers, and the truth is the most important.
Understood, which we respect, of course. This is another exchange from today from Dr. Fauci. Watch this.
It's very disrespectful to me because I'm in my 70s, but it isn't just the elderly and those with underlying conditions, because it can be serious in young people.
Sorry, that was from an interview, obviously. But what he was referring to was the president's claim at the rally the other night, where he said that it affects elderly people, people with heart problems, and he said nobody young, below the age of 18, they have a strong immune system. And that is actually what Dr. Fauci was referring to. Where do you stand on that divide?
Well, it's not where I stand, it's what the evidence shows. And clearly, elderly individuals are at very high risk. 80% of our mortality is over age 65. We know that racial and ethnic minorities are 5 times more likely to be in hospitals. Those who are under 18, under 21, are very unlikely to have a serious consequence.
We have pointed that out many times. Go ahead.
But they can still be hospitalized, and there have been deaths.
I think
we
that
have
was
to be careful with our children.
We heard
as
Dr.
well.
Fauci today talking about lingering effects and heart conditions and inflammation around the heart. How big a concern is that? Is that a very rare situation, or is it a big concern?
It is a legitimate and a serious concern. We don't know how many people it happens in. But let me just say, Martha, even after influenza or other summertime viruses, we can see this kind of heart inflammation. So this is not something entirely new. It's something that we need to look for, and we do need to follow it. It can resolve completely, or it could lead to arrhythmias or poor heart function. So we do need to follow it. We need to get more data. This is a brand new virus, so we really have to follow it closely, as Dr. Fauci said today.
All right, Admiral, thank you. Very good to have you here.
Where those shots went, and whether or not these shots were warranted.
So the president was just asked about the announcement, and instead of giving his own answer, Congresswoman, he read from the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron's statement. And earlier, he did respond in this way. Let me play it for you.
I love the black community, and I've done more for the black community than any other president. And I say, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln, and I mean that, with opportunity zones and with criminal justice reform, with prison reform, with what we've done for historically black universities, colleges, schools, what we've done. It's nobody's done more. Abraham Lincoln, let's give him the nod, but beyond that, nobody's done more.
So you hear that? Do you think that message will resonate with black voters?
Well, black voters are enormously astute, and they're also respectful. They're energized, and they are energetic. And they understand that they have to vote in this election because it is life or death. It is interesting to recognize that all presidents are human with all kinds of frailties, and so President Lincoln had his. But whenever you see a modern-day president begin to compare himself or herself to Abraham Lincoln, you begin to start seeing frivolity and insincerity and, of course, lack of truth. So we don't hear anything that moves us to believing that he has done more for black people. And when you call us black people in America, it almost reminds us of the moment of bondage, that we're his people and he's done something for us. When you do something for African Americans, the descendants of enslaved Africans, you really do something for America. His efforts on criminal justice reform have gone flat because they have not funded the Federal Bureau of Prisons to be able to see it actually implemented. Our members of Congress wrote that legislation. They did an excellent job. They had excellent good intentions, but we don't see the impact of it under this administration. And then I would say for the historically black colleges, I happen to have a number of them in the state of Texas. I can say to you that some of them are still financially suffering. They're suffering with COVID-19. He has not seen fit to pass the HEROES Act, which has a lot of money in there for our colleges and primary and secondary schools. So I think that falls short. What we want to know is how sincere are you in the criminal justice arena, which is really the pain that African Americans are feeling. They're feeling it because they can have a roll call. And you know, Aaron, you've been reporting about Tamir Rice or Walter Scott or Eric Garner or Michael Brown or Mr. Rashad in Atlanta who wanted to go home to see his daughter's birthday party. My constituent who I share with Congressman Omar, he grew up in Texas, and that is George Floyd. And of course, we know Elijah in Colorado and Jacob Blake. These are just recent individuals, and there are many others. And so I think our community is a fair community. And really, there's everyone. There's suburban moms protesting. There are people of all backgrounds protesting. We want simple justice. This was not, and this should have gone to a trial with the indictment of all three, and they would have gotten a fair trial. And if not, then the Justice Department has a responsibility for starting an investigation, maybe a civil rights investigation around Breonna's death.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson
for the Supreme Court. Should former Vice President Biden do the same thing?
I'd recommend against it, and I think he's announced that he's not going to do it. Trump is the first president to put out the list of approved people. The so-called Federalist Society has to give them a stamp of approval. There are a handful of things they look for, and then they make the Trump list, which continues to grow by the day. But I don't think Joe Biden should do that. I trust his judgment. I served on the Judiciary Committee with him. I know the kind of people that he's backed for key spots in the judiciary. I think when he gets the opportunity to fill a Supreme Court vacancy, he'll be a quality person.
This is a process question. Hearings we expect to happen in the Judiciary Committee, and I spotted
soon. The strong ag markets.
Bad planet, out of this world service.
So that is exactly what the Senate will provide. Now, Madam President, on another matter, yesterday the House.
And when Congress is sued to enforce its rights in courts, we have been forced into a years-long process.
An eye doctor or something, but apparently he didn't study too much in school when it came to science. Here he is debating Dr. Fauci.
Right now, if you look at what's going on right now, the things that are going on in New York to get their test positivity 1% or less is because they are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've developed enough community immunity that they're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You are not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
You know, Dr. Patel, it's bad enough when Dr. Trump thinks that he is promoting herd mentality. He means herd immunity. Well, now you have Rand Paul doing the same thing. How much trouble are we in if you have Republican officials trying to push this idea that would mean, you know, what, another 6 million people dead?
Yeah, this is, I mean, Joy, you said it, this is a herd mentality by just kind of, it's demonizing science. And you know what, I could watch that Fauci clip over and over again because he's one of the most preeminent infectious disease doctors in the world, writes foremost, you know, chapters and textbooks that we all study from. And that was a true smackdown that was well deserved because, to your point, this constant reverberation against the facts, that we can have herd immunity without actually having consequences, that we can ignore the consequences that we do have, that we can have 121 children die, 80% of which are children of color, for no other reason except that they were born, just as Mehdi said, just into, a culture of immigration that all three of us can share. This demonization is spilling over into science. And Joy, he just said it today, that if the FDA has a rigorous science approval for an evidence-based, scientific, transparent approval of the vaccine, it's not up to the FDA. The commissioner made a mistake. It's up to the White House. This is a unitary power that is being defined and has been going on.
It is bizarre. Before we go, Mehdi, really quickly, you have now the governor of Missouri has tested positive. He and his wife both have tested positive for COVID. At least one person who attended Donald Trump's September 10th super spreader rally has tested positive. Are we essentially now seeing a Trump virus, essentially, that the virus is going to follow him and the people who follow him around?
It's a very good point. He loves to give names to viruses. He doesn't want to call it the coronavirus. He wants to call it the China virus. Fine, let's call it the Trump virus. I think your colleague Chris Hayes, friend of both of ours, makes a very good point. Trump at this point is objectively pro-COVID. Put it this way, if you wanted to spread the coronavirus, if you were trying to get people to get the virus, what would you do differently that Donald Trump's not already doing right now?
Yeah, the Trump virus it is. He likes to call things names. He likes to have his name on things. Congratulations, Donald. You've got yourself a virus. Thank you, Dr. Kavita Patel. Thank you, Mehdi Hassan.
But it's not just police officers who have been targeted by the mob. It's the entire city of Louisville. Watch. In Louisville, authorities have acted more decisively tonight than authorities in many other cities have responded this summer. They've called in the National Guard. Local police have also moved in, apparently in force. But the mob is still destroying businesses and private property. There are too many for police to contain. Watch this.
No justice, no peace. Keep racist police. No justice, no peace. Keep racist police.
So this is how America works now. You don't like a grand jury decision, so you break things and you hurt people and you steal what isn't yours. That's how we function now. But no country can function for long under that standard. Things will fall apart. And that, of course, is the point of the riots. They've got nothing to do with Breonna Taylor. Most of these thugs know nothing about her. Quiz them. The point, by contrast, is to break America, to overthrow our system, to replace it with something else with other people in charge. That's what this is about. It's a coordinated effort, and it's a well-funded effort. Watch the mob unload a U-Haul full of signs, shields, and other riot supplies today. So the obvious question is, who's paying for all this? Who's organizing it? It is organized, and it's expensive. And someone is doing that. We have some leads tonight into who rented the U-Haul truck you just saw. And as we find more, we'll bring it to you, of course. But the broad outlines are...
This group, some of the people in this group did set small fires, and now they're just marching through the streets. So we'll see at what point do the police move in here to try and prevent them from further marching here, Anderson.
Yeah, Shimon, I was just talking to Jason, and we actually saw on his shot 2 small fires that had been set. Is that something you have been seeing as well?
Now, the fires are relatively new for this protest. I have not seen any fires earlier. They started setting fires at Jefferson Square, where Jason was. I was there as well. And what happened was, after they started lighting the fires, the police told them they needed to clear out, that it was an illegal assembly and that they needed to clear out. But that wasn't until the fires started being set. And then the police came out in riot gear to extinguish the fire. They used a fire extinguisher people moved back. But what was happening was the protesters were throwing water bottles at the police, but the police retreated and they went back into the building. So the fires, I did not see any fires set earlier during some of the marches, but it looked like they were trying to burn a lot of the objects over at Jefferson Square Park, where a lot of the protesters have been staying for weeks in anticipation of this hearing to hear what's going to happen with this investigation. They are now setting parts of that area on fire. So after the police told them they had to clear out, they started marching. They anticipate, I have heard many of them, they anticipate the police moving in at some point, so they're trying to disperse, but they're continuing to march here. We see some police up ahead here, Anderson. So the question is, when do the police, what they've been doing, Anderson, is they will make an announcement, and they will say you have to disperse, you have to get out of the street, or you'll get arrested.
Yeah. Shimon, appreciate it. Be careful. We're going to continue to keep the pictures up as we talk more about the case. We're going to go to Drew Griffin for one of the more controversial aspects of the events that led to the killing of Breonna Taylor, the warrant that police received to enter her apartment. Drew, your investigation of the origin of the warrant found a slew of issues. Talk to me about that.
And really, Anderson, this was not addressed by today's news conference at all. It's still pretty much under investigation, but is the question of why exactly the officers were even at Breonna Taylor's apartment that night at 12:40 in the morning with a battering ram. This was part of a broader kind of takedown of 5 different places. Search warrants issued, in no-knock search warrants issued for each location. Most of them were drug houses. And then there was Breonna Taylor's apartment, this apartment of a 26-year-old girl. She had been dating in the past one of the targeted, I would say, petty drug dealers that was a target of one of these raids. But the evidence we found in the search warrants was very, very thin. The only connection that we could see to Breonna Taylor's apartment was that in January, one of the suspects came to her apartment, they say, in the middle of the day, picked up a USPS package, and left. That is pretty much it. It is months old. They do believe that in February, one of the drug dealers may have been getting some other mail, but there is no evidence of that. And then when the actual search warrant was executed after the shooting, Anderson, they found no drugs, no money, nothing to connect Breonna Taylor. That's despite the fact that the detective who got these arrest warrants issued said in advance that it is his belief through training and evidence and experience that she may be keeping narcotics and or proceeds from the sale of narcotics at Breonna Taylor's address. So the information was very sketchy to begin with. That is the crux of the case that Breonna Taylor's family brought against the Louisville police. They don't believe that for any reason she should have been targeted in the first place.
And Drew, police maintain that despite being issued a no-knock warrant, they did indeed knock. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, who was inside her apartment at the time, says that they did knock. What's in dispute is, did the police identify themselves? The boyfriend says no, as do all but one neighbor of Breonna Taylor. Is that correct?
That's right. Breonna Taylor's current boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, believed it was the old drug dealer coming knocking in the middle of the night, and that scared him. He did not hear the words police. We talked to several other of the neighbors, immediate neighbors. This is a very tight little cluster. Nobody that I talked to heard the words police. Most of them were woken up by gunfire. There was a person upstairs who poked his head out and was told to get back in. That may be the person they're referring to, but Anderson, we could find nobody who said they heard them say, this is the police, open up.
Griffin, hang on a second. I want to talk now about these charges and what happened that night on March 13th with Stephen Romines, the attorney for Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who you saw earlier tonight. Mr. Romines, your reaction today to the charges and what's your client's reaction?
My client's very disappointed, but I'm not surprised. It's more of a cover-up. You know, as Drew indicated, there were a dozen witnesses who said they did not identify themselves as police. The Attorney General said, well, the evidence that they identified themselves was both officers said they did. They're the targets of the investigation. You don't take their word at face value. Oh, it was corroborated by
Sorry, go ahead.
another witness. That witness initially told the police that the day after, nobody identified themselves as police. They had to interview him 2 more times before they could get him to say that, yeah, I heard him say police. It is a recorded interview that is transcribed by LMPD in which he says no one identified themselves as police. That is his first interview. And yet they go in front of the grand jury and rely on the statement, 2 months later in which he said, yeah, they identified themselves. It is incompetence and corruption at the highest order.
The Attorney General today said that the investigation found the officers were justified in their use of force after having been fired upon by your client, Kenneth Walker. What's your response to that?
Okay, well, they may very well have been. That's a question to present to a jury. It is not for prosecutorial fiat to declare suspects innocent. I've been defending criminal cases for 30 years, Anderson. When my clients are charged with murder, they take it in front of a jury and a jury decides. The prosecutor doesn't just say, oh yeah, you're justified, go home now. And that is the problem, and that is what people are really upset about, is if a jury acquits them, fine. You say you have a warrant, that's a good defense. You say you acted in self-defense, let's see what a jury says. But the prosecutor just summarily exonerating them is not how the system works. It does not ever work that way for individual citizens. And it shouldn't work that way for police either, and it shouldn't work that way in this case. Let a jury hear the case and determine if they've got a defense, and it rises to the level of a reasonable doubt. However, Daniel Cameron just saying they're justified, that's not how it works. The other thing about it is this. You are never in Kentucky justified for killing a third party when you're acting in self-defense. If you act recklessly and kill a third party, self-defense does not apply. That is not available to you under Kentucky law. And yet, again, they summarily claim, we're not going to go forward. I'm deciding as the ruler on high that they were justified. And I will guarantee you, the grand jury never had an opportunity to charge them with a homicide. It was never presented to them.
The Attorney General also said your client, Kenneth Walker, fired the shot that hit Officer Mattingly, and that there's no evidence to support that Mattingly was hit by friendly fire from the other officers.
Yeah. And here's what I'll say about that. In their ballistics investigation that is in the PIU file indicates that the shot that hit Mattingly is inconclusive as to whether it came from Kenny Walker's gun. So when he says we're not going to charge Officer Hangison with the murder of Breonna Taylor because it was inconclusive whether or not his shots hit her, that's exonerating Hangison. It's inculpating Kenny Walker. It is the exact same inconclusive conclusion, and it is in the documents that they have in front of them. And what I've said, Anderson, a lot of things that contradict what Attorney General Daniel Cameron said today. Release the report and the evidence in it, and we'll see who's telling the truth.
The Kentucky,
I've read it. I know what it says.
The Kentucky governor called on the Attorney General to publicly release information relating to his office's investigation into Breonna Taylor's death. Louisville mayor also said that the AG should make publicly available any information that doesn't jeopardize the Attorney General or FBI cases for the public to be informed. Is that going to actually happen?
If it happens, it will show that everything he said today was not supported by the evidence. So, and again, the question is, why won't they release it? There's no justifiable reason not to be transparent and release the evidence. But if it is done, it will show what I'm telling you now is accurate, and what he said today is not accurate.
So you've seen all the information that's in it? Correct. And you've seen that in the capacity as Kenneth Walker's attorney. You're allowed to see that. Just lastly, where does Kenneth Walker's lawsuit against the city of Louisville Metro Police stand right now? What are the next steps here?
We have filed our complaint. We have sent subpoenas for them to publicly release all the evidence in the case. That's what we're asking for, and we are waiting for them to file a responsive pleading and answer the case. And we'll go forward. I'm ready to start taking depositions of these people now. Let's get them under oath and see what they have to say.
Stephen Romines, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Want to get some perspective now? CNN Law.
seen Utopia. Everything in Utopia is real.
Will we find out who is paying for this? Who is behind it? We'll investigate after the break. The Attorney General said.
Anderson, I just don't know that that is true. I, of course, would love to see what was presented to the grand jury. I don't believe that attorney was in the grand jury and saw what was presented, so I would like to learn more from him what exactly he is referring to, other than what the police have already released in this case. But I do agree with him. There's a lot of questions that still remain unanswered, and it would have been good to have this go to a jury or a trial so that all that evidence could be presented. What we have here is a truncated form of justice where the grand jury has been able to decide, based on just the evidence presented to them by the Attorney General, what the case would eventually be.
Professor Brown Marshall, I'm wondering what your initial reaction is to this decision.
Well, my initial reaction was outrage, of course, sadness. It was American history repeating itself. African Americans, in particular African American women, have been brutalized throughout the history of this country, and the prosecutorial system needs reform. We focus so much on the criminal justice system from the police angle, but we don't look at the prosecutorial system. And it's not too late to indict these officers. Just because they weren't indicted with this impaneled grand jury doesn't mean they cannot be indicted in the future. We need to understand that Kenneth Walker acted in self-defense, but it seems self-defense only matters if you're white. And if you're black, reckless endangerment and any other type of reckless behavior or even downright murder is all right if the officer is in any way in danger. It doesn't matter how that officer might have endangered those people in that room. So black people aren't safe in their beds. They're not safe driving. They're not safe walking. As an African American and a woman, this is historically what America has done, is destabilize the black community and make us feel we're unsafe anywhere without protection by police or the prosecutor's office.
Chief Ramsey, do you agree?
Not entirely, I don't. Let me first start by saying that the death of Breonna Taylor is indeed a tragedy. There's no question about that. And I do agree with Drew. I mean, there needs to be more information made public so that people can actually see the evidence, as long as it doesn't jeopardize the pending trial of the one officer, who, by the way, I clearly believe should have been charged in this case. I don't know Kentucky law, but he definitely should have been charged, and he was charged. The other two officers, however, Mattingly and Cosgrove, they were executing a warrant, a valid search warrant. It's alleged that they knocked and announced their office. A witness did hear that. Whether or not others heard it, I don't know, but if it was a no-knock warrant, they didn't have to do that. They did make a forced entry. One officer, Mattingly, was shot by one of the individuals in the apartment, Mr. Walker, and they returned fire. Now, they were fired upon and they returned fire. That is a justified use of force. Now, you can debate, and it's unfortunate, obviously, and tragic that Breonna Taylor was struck and killed. It would have been equally tragic if Mr. Walker had been shot and killed. Any death is a tragedy. But when you start talking about criminal charges, that's entirely different, in my opinion. Again, I can only go based on what the Attorney General said in his statement. I don't have access to any other information, but I do believe, and Drew raised this issue, which I think is probably a key issue here, and that is, why were they there to begin with? What was in the complaint for search warrant? What led them to that location, and even to believe that Breonna Taylor was involved in criminal activity, or that they would find any kind of criminal evidence once they executed the search warrant? This has to be fresh information. This can't be something based on what you saw 2 months ago.
And Drew, you're saying that's exactly what it was, that this was something that was shaky to begin with.
Yeah. And that needs to be scrutinized very carefully. But the people who executed the warrant were not the ones who applied for the warrant.
Drew, quickly on the timing.
Yeah, I would just ask Chief Ramsey. I mean, the only physical evidence that you can see in this warrant was they saw this drug dealer at that apartment on January 16th. That's it.
Right.
And so we have a shooting in March. It really just shows, I think, a lack of good police.
Professor Brown Marshall,
and I'm not arguing and saying that the warrant was good. I don't know. I didn't read the warrant. I don't know what they had. All I'm saying is that the shooting itself and the officers who executed the warrant weren't part of that investigation at all.
Professor Brown Marshall, you're shaking your head.
I'm shaking my head because this is a carry state. And this is what happens when here's someone who has the right to have a weapon, who is after midnight, someone burst through the door and they shot at the person after asking who is it and not hearing anything. The right of self-defense for black people is almost non-existent when it comes to a white person who is the victim. If this had been the other way around, we just had a case in which people are killing black folks in their own apartment. And in this instance, they had a right to defend themselves. Kenneth Walker had a right to defend himself. And so to say that the officer was justified in firing back when the officer shouldn't have been there in the first place, Kenneth was justified in firing that shot. So I think we're in the wrong position here when it comes to what police officers are doing with a white person who's a victim and what they would have done with a black person. And that's what history bears out, and that's what we have today.
Lori Brown Marshall, Charles Ramsey, Drew Griffin, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good discussion. Just ahead, more on the protest.
Doing it. You can vote. Do we have that graphic? This is the way you can do it. We vote early, in person, in many states. Check your state to see if you can do it.
Well, and you can also check to see if your ballot went in a lot of states. There are ways to track it online. Look, already in this country, 1 out of 3 people vote before Election Day in a typical year, whether in person or absentee. And this time it'll probably be more, probably closer to half or above that. But Trump's diabolical streak here is taking something that never was particularly controversial and making it seem like some horrible disaster. There's another thing that can be done that's important. That is another positive thing. States need money, and Congress provided $400 million, but that's not enough. But the good news is the private sector is actually stepping up. I don't only mean philanthropy actually providing funds, but businesses. There's a coalition called Time to Vote of 1,000 big companies giving people time off and encouraging them to be poll workers, younger people to go staff the polling places. Those kinds of things make a big difference, making the stadiums available as polling places, as the NBA and the NBA Players Association have made happen. There's kind of a civic upsurge to try to help the election to happen, notwithstanding Trump.
Right. So you can volunteer to be a poll worker, particularly if you're young, you're someone who maybe has antibodies, a relatively low risk. We're going to need poll workers. We saw what happened in Milwaukee in that primary, not enough poll workers, so they had to close locations. You get big lines. So you can work to be a poll worker. If you're in a state that can vote early absentee in person, that's relatively safe, relatively empty, relatively spaced out. It means that vote goes into that pile, the count tonight pile, right? Which is key. And then a key thing here, Michael, I think that's worth talking about is tracking your mail-in ballot. If you are going to vote early, if you're going to vote absentee, if you're going to use a mail-in ballot, you will see that the vast majority of states allow you to track it, which means it can be complicated, right? We talked about the naked ballots in Pennsylvania. There's 2 envelopes. You got to sign it, make sure you follow the rules, and then make sure it gets counted by using your state's tool to track the ballot.
Lives Matter, their website, just in the last few days, they scrubbed some parts of their website. Their What We Believe section used to say things like, we want to dismantle the nuclear family. Well, at some point in the last few days, they took all that stuff off, and I think the reason is that they realize that more Americans are waking up to the fact that this is all just a pretense for a far-left radical agenda that has nothing to do with racial justice. And so now they're trying to cover their tracks a little bit.
But I mean, to some extent, it's on us, isn't it? I mean, we're putting up with this. I mean, I hate to say this out loud, but I'm going to. If you owned a business in Louisville, and the authorities said, well, there's going to be a riot because the rioters don't like a grand jury decision, why wouldn't you just put a beach chair right in front of your business and say, I'm defending my business, my property, my life, I have a right to defend it, and I'm going to. I'm not going to board it up. This is America. We don't take orders from rioters. Like, what is this? Why is no one doing that?
Well, I agree with you, but then also you have to keep in mind the position that these business owners are in, and we've seen this happen already, where if they defend their business, then next thing you know, they could be going to jail for that. So it's like either let someone burn down your business or defend it, and next thing you know, you're in prison. And that's the position that a lot of these state governments have put people in.
Yeah, we're requiring cowardice of our population. It's really corrosive, I think. Matt Walsh, you've been a brave voice on these questions from day one, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Well, Democrat.
Nowhere is somewhere. Y'all.
We also want to focus on the protests against the grand jury verdict in the killing of Breonna Taylor that are happening in the rest of the country. You're seeing you're seeing what you're saying. That's the scene in Louisville, Kentucky. We've been showing you protests in Philadelphia, also in New York City. I want to go to Alex Marquardt, who's in Washington, D.C. Alex, what have you been seeing so far?
Well, Anderson, this march here for Breonna Taylor, for Black Lives Matter, has just arrived at the White House at Lafayette Park, which of course has been ground zero for so many of the protests that we've seen over the course of the summer. This protest started at the Department of Justice as the sun was setting. They came down 8th Street, which has now been closed in front of Lafayette Park, chanting "Breeway," which is a chant that we've heard in Louisville, of course, a take on Breonna Taylor's name. And Anderson, what you're seeing here is part memorial, part protest. We've heard tributes to Breonna Taylor. We've heard testimonials, like the words from her own mother. We've also heard speeches about police reform, about the black experience in America, about political reform, and even political revolution. You can see people holding the portrait of Breonna Taylor over their heads. This was, of course, the scene, the site of a number of protests earlier this summer in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. You can still see these fences that were erected during those protests.
Alex, we've got to come back to you. I want to go to Shimon Prokupecz, who is in Louisville. Shimon, can you explain what's going on, what we're seeing in our shot?
So we are with that same group, and what happened was there was fireworks, what sounded like fireworks, maybe even gunshots, and then police started moving in, and you can see here to my left, police pointing weapons, are moving people back. And part of it, what happened, Anderson, is what sounded like gunfire. And the police started moving, and you can see them here pushing our David Albrecht and one of our photographers. David, come this way. So what happened is, Anderson, if you're with me, here, let me just come. What happened was, this crowd was marching, they come to this area, and the police blocked them off. They then started running. And what sounded like gunfire, quite honestly, there was fireworks, but then something sounded like gunfire, and we saw heavily armed police in these armored cars here you'll see going by me move in quickly. And that's what's happening here now. They're trying to move everyone out of the way. And then you can see, I just want to show you quickly, Anderson.
I just got to go to Jason Carroll. Jason Carroll, I'm not sure where you are in relation to Shimon, but explain what you're seeing.
Well, Shimon is at the top end of the demonstrators. We're at the tail end. And just to, hold on, we've got some officers coming this way. Yes, but just as Shimon was saying, what we heard was, initially, it sounded like fireworks. And we had heard some fireworks earlier when we were at Jefferson Square. And then just a few minutes ago, we heard from one of the undercover officers out here that it was in fact gunfire. And so at that point, Anderson, everyone started running in a lot of different directions. We came, took cover underneath this overpass right here. Right now we have police instructing us, telling us what we need to do at this point moving forward. But a number of police in riot gear moved in, did what they could to disperse the crowd, and they'd been asking the crowd to disperse for the last hour or so. As soon as your show started, when we came to you, we started showing you the fires that had been started in various places, and what some of the protesters were doing. About a couple hundred of them, they started marching throughout the city of Louisville, setting fires as they were going on their way. Then that stopped. Then we got to this point where this overpass is right here, and then you had a bottleneck of a couple hundred of these protesters. That's when someone lit off a firework. Shortly after that, That's when we heard the gunfire, and at this point, police now moving in. So we're going to assess the situation, see if we can get some more information for you, and we'll get back to you. Anderson?
All right, Jason Carroll, thank you. We'll continue to monitor that. And now we're back at Shimon Prokupez. As Jason was saying, Shimon is sort of at the front end of the demonstration. Shimon, if you can hear us, just so you're at sort of the front end of the same group of people that Jason is at the rear end of, correct?
Right, and I think Jason is now at a distance, I think, under that underpass. Remember, Anderson, one of the first shots we saw was the police coming out of their cars and just pointing their large guns at the people who were sitting along the grass to the entrance to the highway here, and they were telling them to put their hands up. But everyone started running.
It was everywhere. Why should you switch to Pure Talk?
Investigation. She was in her apartment with her boyfriend, who said he believed the couple was facing a home invasion. He fired his gun once at the front door, injuring an officer. Police fired back, hitting Taylor at least 5 times and killing her. 2 of the officers involved were not charged in the announcement today. They remain on the force on administrative leave. A grand jury recommended charges for a single officer. That would be Brett Hankinson, who was fired back in June. He was not charged with murder or manslaughter, but with first-degree wanton endangerment because of some of the shots he fired blindly into Breonna Taylor's apartment entered the apartment of a neighbor. That former detective faces up to 5 years in prison for each of 3 counts. Legal experts say he could potentially qualify for pretrial diversion, which would potentially keep him out of prison. The officers who shot Breonna Taylor remain free. I'm joined now by New York Times correspondent Rukmini Kalamaki, who's in Louisville tonight. Rukmini, you've been reporting on this and done some amazing reporting on Breonna Taylor's life before this moment. Talk us through what happened today in terms of what evidence was presented, the charges, and what the reaction has been.
You know, Chris, the difficulty with this case is that there were a domino effect of decisions that were taken before the officers even got to her door, which in many ways set in motion the events that led to her death. The 3 officers who showed up at her door were not part of the investigation that led police there in the first place. That intelligence was already flawed. There have been questions about the warrant that was issued in the case of her apartment. But once the raid was in motion, the 3 officers who were at her door did have a warrant that had been signed the day before by a judge, so they were there legally. According to at least one witness, they did announce themselves as police. They beat down her door, and once they got inside her apartment, they were fired at. So what the Attorney General explained is that according to Kentucky's statute on self-defense, they were within their rights to fire back. Brett Hankinson, the detective that is the only one who is being charged here, broke the formation at the door, the stack of officers who were there getting ready to go in. He ran outside into the parking lot, and from the parking lot, without any line of sight, he began blindly firing into her patio door and into her window. Those bullets passed across her. They did not hit her. This is why he is not being charged with her death. But they went into an apartment behind hers where there was a pregnant woman, her husband, and their 5-year-old child. Thankfully, they were not hurt. But that's where that charge is coming from, the reckless endangerment charge for the neighbors who were behind.
We should know that Breonna Taylor's boyfriend says they did not say police, and he did not hear them. There is one witness who said they did hear that. The police say they did announce themselves. He says that it's night and people barge into his door, and he thinks he's being assaulted. There are no drugs on the premises. Nothing is found. There is no reason to think they're doing anything criminal whatsoever. He is a lawful gun owner, and he is protecting his domicile.
Right. A couple of points, Chris. So, number one, according to a former instructor at the police academy here in Kentucky, who taught the course on what is called dynamic entry, which is this type of raid when you burst into somebody's house, you have to knock and announce very loudly. You're supposed to announce so loudly, he said, that you wake up the entire neighborhood. By all accounts, that did not happen. I was able to find, after taking apart that apartment complex, I was able to find a single witness, who I believe is the same witness that the Attorney General and their investigation spoke to. And he was outside his apartment. He was a truck driver who was coming home late from shift, and so he was on the landing outside and heard the police shouting police, and crucially, he heard it only once. So it's possible that both sides are telling a version of the truth here. It's possible that the police announced themselves, but not sufficiently. And it's possible that Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend did not hear them through multiple walls in the bedroom where she was asleep and he was getting ready to fall asleep. Now, regarding the investigation, the family and the legal team have pointed out that no drugs and no cash were found at the premises. The investigators that I've spoken to have pushed back really hard against that, and they point out that no search was actually conducted once she was killed. Once she was killed, the search was called off. I was skeptical of this claim until I was able to get access to hundreds of pages, now thousands of pages of police documents, and I did find among those documents a document that said warrant canceled, and it was issued before all of the protests about Breonna Taylor. So that point remains inconclusive. But you're absolutely right. If you're asleep in your home in the middle of the night, why would you hear police that shout at most police once?
Rukmini Kalamaki, the New York Times, who's down there in Louisville, spoke.
You and Jason were talking about, in fairness to being a pimp, it's a real job. Yes, you get to beat up lots of women, you treat women appallingly, you deal in human trafficking, but it's a real job, it's a hard job, it's a tough job. What Mr. Taylor is now doing is a non-job. And he's getting 150 grand for it, which is actually more than most state governors get. I think he makes more than 30 governors, including my own in New Hampshire. And we all know this. The left know it. The MSNBC guys know it. This is a joke. If you were seriously interested in any of the issues that have been roiling America for the last 6 months, you would not be appointing a pimp as a street czar for 150 grand. That's just the usual attitude-striking nonsense, which is why certain jurisdictions in this country are in permanent decline. One reason China is now the #1 power in the world is because it doesn't actually have to pay ex-pimps to become diversicrats on handsome six-figure salaries that we all know are non-jobs and aren't going to do anything for the alleged issues roiling the country.
So why are we paying our taxes? I mean, just a quick question. Let me wake you up from a dead sleep and say, quick, Mark, why are we paying our taxes? So, a sincere question.
Yes, and I think there's something to be said. If I was a taxpayer in Seattle, if you look at other cities in America where your businesses are ruined, your businesses are trashed, you can't even board up your shattered, ruined business in Minneapolis because you have to pay your taxes a year up front before they'll let you put some plywood.
Deep cleaning, a whole new meaning. And if you don't have insurance, we'll give you an extra.
I love Terry Crews.
Mind-bending.
It is.
It has been a peaceful protest. But talking to people, they are frustrated. They are angry. They're angry because there's no fairness, there's no sense of justice, no accountability for the loss of black lives. And so this is what we're hearing them talk about. As we've heard before, they want to see accountability, they want to see change, and they want to see the lives of Breonna Taylor and all of the other people who have been killed at the hands of police. They want those police held accountable. So this is a group, I've been told by the crowd that it's been growing, not just by the hundreds, which is what it was when we arrived at first, but it goes back almost a mile, or half a mile. You can see the crowd chanting, say her name.
Is there one particular group that has organized this? Or, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different groups involved in protest movements, and often it's done on social media and tell people where they want to, meet up and where they're going to go.
This is done on social media. Right, this is one that's done on social media. It's not very clear how organized it was in the sense of where their ultimate destination is. But there's an Instagram site, there's an Instagram handle called Justice for George Floyd, and that's one of the ways they're getting out the word to bring out all the people to come. They spent at least an hour at Barclays Center chanting and talking, and we began marching about maybe half an hour ago.
Athena Jones.
But it's loosely organized.
I appreciate it. Be careful. We'll continue checking with you throughout the night. This just in from police in Louisville. One officer has been shot. They aren't providing any additional details, as our reporters have been indicating with Jason Carroll and Shimon Prokupez. They had heard at least a shot, perhaps more shots. also some fireworks, and we saw police moving in just in the last few minutes in some areas, particularly around a highway and an overpass. The police say we will update when we can. Another statement from the police. We'll be right back with more from Louisville and New York and Washington, D.C. We'll be right back.
Killing. Now, is that the right call legally? I'll take you through it. It's not simple. But it is simple politically, and it is deeply unsatisfying for many. A curfew is starting right now. We know terrible news. A police officer has been shot tonight. What are the circumstances? Who did it? We're working on that. We pray that they are okay. We're going to try to get you the information. But here's what's not in question. Violence only makes everything worse. And look, that's where we are. And it has to be said. It's one more thing that should be so obvious, and yet is a divided principle right now, let alone against the men and women that we trust to protect us. One more thing that should be obvious is that nothing is made better on these streets if the people that we have in power, who are supposed to calm, who are supposed to create change, stay silent. And that makes us ask, why did the president refuse to address the need for calm in Kentucky when he was asked? Why did he choose to celebrate the prosecutor, celebrate the grand jury determination, but say nothing for those processing pain and outrage? It is not easy to accept why the police were justified in not just shooting, but killing a non-shooter. Breonna Taylor was an innocent third party, by all accounts. So here we are once again. Streets filling with people who are outraged, who don't understand, who need counsel, who need guidance. And in the absence of that, we must have concern of what happens next. It's not just coming from me. It's a word of caution from a legend of the civil rights era. Listen.
The violent response in Chicago would be a mistake. It would be a commercial for Trump. We can't do that. We must be smart enough not to turn our anguish and anger into self-destruction. Give Trump a commercial. Turn pain to power.
Turn pain to power. Violence will help Trump's cause. You know who believes that? Trump. Helps him with the base that he is constantly scaring about black marauders. BLM to him, to his friends on Fox, it's not a movement, it's a boogeyman. Fox gets it. They struggle to...
Permitted as part of law enforcement strategy and techniques to forcibly enter the home without knocking. However, police reported that they did still knock and identify themselves for a period of time before ramming the front door open. And according to the Kentucky Attorney General, one witness, a neighbor, heard, in fact, the officers identify themselves as police officers. Now, at the time, shortly after midnight on March the 13th, Breonna Taylor was in the bedroom with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, not her ex-boyfriend, the suspected drug dealer. Walker claims police did not identify themselves when asked, and when they broke down the door, he fired, and he had a legally owned firearm. He did injure one police officer. A gun battle ensued. Police then proceeded to return fire, and that killed Breonna Taylor in a hail of bullets. 8 shots in total hit her. No drugs were found in Taylor's apartment. The only officer charged today by the grand jury was a detective by the name of Brett Hankinson, who was fired after his own department accused him of blindly firing 10 rounds into Taylor's apartment. Keep in mind, these are the rules. This is the system of justice that they have in Louisville. A grand jury is comprised of 12 individuals. To get an indictment, 9 of which have to vote to indict in order for someone to be charged. The evidence in grand juries is secret, and the defense is not permitted to mount any case. This is just for an indictment. It wouldn't be a guilty verdict. The grand jury allegedly were briefed on all possible charges, everything from capital murder to manslaughter to where we ended up for one police officer, wanton endangerment, which is what Hankinson ultimately was charged with. Tonight, of course, people all across the country mourning the horrific death of Breonna Taylor. We hope to protest tonight in honor of her life, a peaceful life that saved lives, that some and all don't have ulterior motives. In this country, we have a system of justice. We are guided by laws. Is it perfect? Nope. Can I think of a better system? Is there a better system? Not that I've heard. Judges, juries, grand juries, trials. We believe in the presumption of innocence. We believe all the facts should come in. We believe we shouldn't rush to judgment. Now, within this system, we can and should always make improvements, pursue a more perfect union as we attempt to make this country a more perfect place for everybody. Mob rule, anarchy, violence, arson, vandalism, shooting police officers, hurling rocks and bricks and Molotov cocktails and frozen water bottles.
Park. I'll get out of the way and show you the line of police. Keep in mind, curfew technically started about 6 minutes ago. We got alerts on our phone that folks should start to head home, so this is about as close as we're going to get. We are about 0.8 of a mile from where that incident took place that we understand at least 2 police officers from LMPD were shot. We don't know the conditions. We know that they're at University of Louisville Hospital, and as you said, there will be a press conference, we understand, later. That news immediately changed the mood here. For about 2 hours, things were as they have been in the past. There was a lot of frustration, people very obviously upset, and there were minor clashes with police. I'm saying minor because we're talking about water bottles being thrown at police using those sort of small pepper ball rounds, and then as you can see here, there's a few minor fires. All of this a long way of saying that people here have been telling us tonight they do not believe that the law was designed to protect Breonna Taylor. Over 195 days of protests leading to tonight, and as you so laid out, no charges related directly to the Breonna Taylor shooting. We've heard from her family, who basically have called this a miscarriage of justice. They are very upset, the legal team.
Kentucky's Attorney General says the 2 other officers who fired shots were justified because of what I just said, that their use of force was okay because Taylor's boyfriend fired at them first. But it leaves you with the same question. So if you get fired at, it's okay if you kill anybody else who has nothing to do with it? That's okay? Absolutely. And at the grand jury level, that's not something that has to go before a jury? So what does this mean? Well, the first instance circumstance we have to deal with is what's going on in the streets and what may have happened to this police officer tonight. We do have reports of a shooting. So let's go to the ground in Louisville with Shimon Prokupez. Shimon, what do you know about the shooting?
Yeah, so what we know is what the police have told us, and that is that one of their officers had been shot. We believe, Chris, it happened behind me here. This is why the police here have closed off this road. We were actually following the protesters when we heard fireworks, and then moments later we could hear the gunshots and then people running. The entire episode appears to have been captured by the police department on their live stream, on their Facebook page, and here's what it sounded like at that moment.
Shots fired. Good? Good. You all good? Good. Officer down, right here. Officer down? Yes. Take cover. Officer down. Take cover.
Streets of America in the year 2020. All right, Shimon, listen. Obviously, that doesn't help us understand anything other than the general context of there's chaos going on over there. So we're going to have to find out, see if the video or anything shows or gives any direction or any kind of reporting about who may have been involved and what else may happen. Stay safe. Keep the team safe. That's the priority. Fact.
So at 8 p.m., 1 hour ago, there was an announcement made that it was an unlawful assembly over a loudspeaker by the police. And the thing that triggered that were these fires. There's some small fires here. There's another one behind you, Mark, on the other side. And once these small fires were lit, that was when the police decided to move in. They used some of those non-lethal pepper ball rounds, and they started to move the crowd. The crowd tried to set one of the buildings on fire. Everything in the downtown area is boarded up, and they tried to light some of those boards on fire. That was clearly a line that the police had laid down in their minds that they would step in and start to enforce. So at 8 p.m. they moved into this park, they started clearing it out, they used those flashbang grenades, they used some of that pepper spray.
Long reported these findings confirm zero experience, Hunter. Remember he said to ABC, any experience in oil? Nope. Gas? Nope. Energy? Nope. Ukraine? Nope. Why do you think you got millions of dollars? I don't know. Maybe because your father was in charge of Ukrainian money and policies? Probably. Anyway, he did get millions from a corrupt Kremlin-linked Ukrainian oil and gas company called Burisma Holdings. Now, Hunter had zero experience in all of this. Still, Hunter was rewarded with this lucrative position because his father, the vice president, Joe Biden, was in fact in charge of America's Ukraine policies, on tape bragging about what he did. As you probably remember, then Vice President Biden leveraged $1 billion U.S. tax dollars to get a Ukrainian prosecutor fired. You're going to fire this guy who's investigating my zero experience son being, well, paid millions for corruption and other parts of the investigation, or you're not getting the money. And you have 6 hours. Son of a bee, they did it. Remember all that the media mob and Democrats ignored? Well, there's a lot more to the story. It turns out this is only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, according to the Senate's findings, Hunter Biden and his family received millions of dollars from foreign nationals with questionable backgrounds. According to the report, Hunter actually raked in a whopping $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow, as in Russia, via a wire transfer. Hunter also opened a joint bank account with a Chinese national in order to fund a $100,000 shopping spree for members of his family. And that's not all. Joe Biden's experience, which was zero, also scored lucrative multi-million-dollar business deals with foreign nationals associated with, you got it, China's Communist Party and China's military. And when you think it couldn't get any worse, think again. And by the way, maybe that explains why Joe Biden refused to support the travel ban and was more concerned about how China felt about America than he did about keeping Americans safe when Donald Trump put it in place 10 days after the first identified case of coronavirus. Hunter Biden was allegedly using some of his money to hire, apparently, prostitutes from Russia and other Eastern European countries who were the victims of a sex trafficking ring. That's in the report. The report determined that all of these are problematic activities, problematic business dealings. It creates serious counterintelligence and extortion concerns. In fact, Joe Biden, John Kerry, other high-ranking Obama administration officials, they were specifically briefed on the serious concerns surrounding Hunter Biden and the compromised position of Joe Biden. According to the report, the Obama administration, quote, knew that Hunter Biden's position on Burisma's board was problematic and did interfere with the efficient execution of policy with respect to Ukraine. But despite getting briefed about his son's illicit activities, Joe Biden claimed, I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business deals. Well, Joe, looks like you might be caught in a big fat lie tonight. What?
But totally sometimes could be.
The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, new weeknights on Comedy Central.
Attention at all. Remember the 8 minutes with George Floyd? Can you imagine 20? And then the police are engaging in cover-up behavior. That is criminal, and that's not prosecuted. So listen, you have so much wrongdoing. The policy is terrible, the policing is terrible, and the prosecutor could come in and find a way forward here, and instead basically just punch. And the thing that we aren't talking about enough, if someone kicked in your door tonight and said nothing, but they had guns, you have a right to defend yourself, unless you're black. Everybody can stand their ground, unless you're black. Everybody has the Second Amendment right, unless you're black. If you're black and you defend yourself, you defend your girlfriend, then you're on trial, she's dead, and the cops get away with it. So if you wonder why people are upset, this is why. That said, violence from the left is completely unacceptable. We don't want lawlessness in the police department. We don't want lawlessness from right-wing vigilantes. And we don't want lawlessness from the left either. We got too much lawlessness, too much violence, too many people getting shot, too many funerals. We need to calm this thing down. We need leadership from the top on both sides to get us out of this mess. But this was a disaster today, an absolute catastrophe.
One point to the record, then Scott, to you. It is in dispute whether or not this was executed as a no-knock warrant. They did have a witness, according to the prosecutor. He called it uncontroverted testimony. I don't know that that's accurate either. Why? I'll get to that in a second. But they had a witness that said he heard them knock and say it was the police. Now, others interviewed did not hear anything. Walker says he did not hear anything. Is that influential? It should be, because the person who has the most to lose in all this is Walker, right? He's the one who shot back. He's the one who may have hit a cop. He's the one who certainly by shooting now bears at least some type of guilt about what happened to his girlfriend. So for him to say what he heard and didn't hear, you have to take it under advisement. But with that being unclear under the record, Scott, what's your take on Van's point about how this is being perceived?
Well, look, I agree with Van and many people who've expressed this today. This is an absolute tragedy. A life was lost. She should not have been killed. She should not have been shot. I think there are significant questions about the warrant and how it was served and how it was procured that are now being looked at by the Civil Rights Division at the FBI, and they need to look at it. Because as Van pointed out and as others have said today, you know, if somebody comes to your house in the middle of the night and it's unclear who it is and you may have reason to believe that they're hostile, I mean, you can see how Walker was put in an extremely terrible position here. And so I agree with many of the things Van said. And so the hurt, the anguish that Louisville, I'm in Louisville, by the way, the hurt, the anguish that this entire community has felt is real. The law here and the truth of the investigation was laid out by the Attorney General today. On the state matter, I still think the FBI Civil Rights Division matter is ongoing, Chris, and I think some of the topics you raised about the warrant is where that's going to get sorted out.
Scott, also, I know you have contact down there. If you can get my eyes on the ballistics, I'm happy to clarify it for people. The last thing I want is doubt about the material facts. I'm just going on what Walker has said through his attorney, and his attorney who has said he has observed these documents. I have no reason to believe he's lying. I'm happy to clarify it through first-person reporting. I'm happy to do it. Let me know. Now we get to the macro issue here. Scott, why isn't the president saying what you guys are saying right now? We have one leader in these situations. He has only given voice to these situations to warn white people of more of this happening unless he stays president. You okay with that?
No, I'm not. Look, I agree with Van. Anybody in a position of leadership, from the president to an attorney general to a governor to a mayor, anybody in any city or jurisdiction has the responsibility to say the things that we want them to say, which is to calm the nation, to calm their jurisdiction, to say violence should not beget other violence, to say that when someone dies, it is a tragedy, no matter how the investigation turns out, no matter what the truth of it is a tragedy, to understand, to empathize, to reflect the emotions of our communities and of our nation. And so when he doesn't do that, it is a failure. Now, at the same time, he believes that and has confidence in, obviously, the Attorney General of Kentucky, and he gave voice to that today. But there are two things you have to do. You can support that, and that's good, but you also have to reflect and internalize the hurt of the American people and the people of Louisville and other cities on this, and he needs to do it.
But why doesn't he, Van?
Look, I don't know why he doesn't, but I do want to tell you this. He really needs to, especially on this one. I don't think people understand. Black women across this country, they gravitate to this case because too often, frankly, the whole system comes down on women because of their boyfriends. How many women are serving time because their boyfriend was doing something? Their boyfriend had something in their car. Their boyfriend this, their boyfriend that. So there's a whole unspoken amount of pain about how black women get treated worse in the system than almost anybody else, maybe actually more than anybody else. And there's no justice. Most of our movements around criminal justice are about the brothers and the brothers this and the black man that, and the women are left out. They're abused by the system, and they're left out by the movement. And black women across the country said, not this time. Not this time. We're not going to let this happen anymore. And the NBA came, and this became a cause célèbre, and black women fighting for their humanity through the cause of this case. And then for this outcome to be people being spat in the face by the prosecutor. There is something that can be charged here. I guarantee you. They throw the book at kids in the neighborhood over nothing. You mean all these bullets fired, no help for this woman, and no charges having anything to do with her body, with her humanity, is completely outrageous. And so on this one, he needs to speak. Because as much as you can talk about everything else, if an innocent black woman shot down in her own house with no recourse, no justice, the criminal justice system, that should offend everybody in the country, especially given the amount of passion that's been shown and the tenacity that's been shown by black women.
Van, Scott, thank you very much for speaking to What Matters tonight on the show. I appreciate you both. We're going to take a break, then we're going to bring in very key components here, okay? The lawyer for Breonna Taylor's family. How does Breonna's family process this? What does it mean? And the attorney I was talking about before, Mr. Walker's attorney, has had access to certain parts of the police file. That's why I say what I said about the ballistics. We have someone who understands forensics in this situation and who can speak to what matters here in terms of fact and law and, of course, policy. Next.
Feel the clarity of non-drowsy Claritin and 24-hour relief from symptoms caused by over 200 indoor and outdoor allergens, like those from Buddy. And for kids, try Children's Claritin, the only brand that provides 24-hour non-drowsy allergy relief.
Hello, world. Do you see me? Though hidden, I am here, waiting for the rest of my life to unfold. Soon, I will arrive. Or will I? It's really not up to me. Be my champion.
We are there, everybody. Took 4 years, turns out. 244 years to stand this republic up, 4 years to cut it down. Just under 1,000 Americans died today from coronavirus. We are still up around 40,000 new cases a day. And every single day now, 7 days a week, we lose 400, 500, 700, 900, 1,000 Americans dying every day, depending on the day, depending on where it's surging now. Missouri's Republican Governor Mike Parson and his wife just announced that they have tested positive. The First Lady of Missouri is apparently sick from her infection as well, although the governor says he feels well. Like a number of pro-Trump Republican governors, Governor Parson in Missouri has been something of a COVID denialist. Here's him at a political event, a steak fry in July, telling a not socially distanced, mostly elderly crowd, you don't need government to tell you to wear a dang mask. Governor Parson is tonight resting at home with his wife. He's canceled his upcoming events. Neither of them is hospitalized, but both have now tested positive. CNN reporting today that Dr. Deborah Birx from the White House Coronavirus Task Force is, quote, distressed over the direction of the White House Coronavirus Task Force right now and the rise of a quack radiologist from Fox News who's apparently taken over the Coronavirus Task Force now from the infectious disease and epidemiological experts who used to be part of it, including Dr. Birx herself. The president apparently prefers the advice he's getting from the radiologist guy who has no experience in epidemiology or infectious disease. He publicly and apparently privately has questioned why people need masks and whether it might be a good thing to get as many people as possible infected. And boy, it seems like there's too much testing, doesn't there? The president likes his advice, and so that's what the White House is running with. So that's who's in charge of U.S. policy on coronavirus now. Meanwhile, today, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the infectious disease expert in the U.S. government, lost his cool with one Republican senator today who kept spewing that same kind of Fox News nonsense about herd immunity and all the rest. Dr. Redfield, the head of the CDC, is facing calls today for his resignation amid mounting reports of how he has failed to protect his agency, how he has succumbed and acceded and even participated in levying political pressure from the White House and other Trump administration officials against the scientists of his own agency, pressuring them to distort and skew CDC scientific findings and reports to match the nonsense coming from the White House. Some of that reporting about Redfield being a willing instrument of that pressure from the White House is coming from right here. on this show. Today in Congress, under oath, CDC Director Robert Redfield answered questions about our reporting last night on him effectively tampering with CDC science, tampering with the report of CDC scientists who were investigating COVID transmission at meatpacking plants, making them rescind their report and water it down. In an industry where tens of thousands of Americans have gotten infected at work and hundreds have died. We'll have more on that coming up this hour. But this mix that we now live in, right? This mix of profound government failure and increasingly rapid, profound government radicalization. Right? We've got over 200,000 Americans dead in 6 months. 20% of the world's fatalities, we've got 4% of the world's population. We've got the most fatalities in the world, the biggest epidemic in the world, and growing. Our public health agencies undercut and messed with, the economy a smoking wreck, the corruption in government off the charts to the point where it's literally hard to keep track on a daily basis. Even when, like me, you get paid every day to follow this stuff in the news. I mean, it barely even made a ripple today that the guy who's been running the Homeland Security Department, he's up for confirmation belatedly now after illegally running that agency for months without being confirmed. Turns out his wife's firm has received $6 million in Homeland Security Department contracts since he's been on board there. They never had contracts with Homeland Security before now, but they sure do now since her husband, Chad Wolf, got a Trump administration job there. I mean, that is a show-stopping, multi-million-dollar corruption allegation in any other modern presidency. But here, good luck squeezing a single headline or two out of that one. But it's absolutely par for the course when the corruption is this thick in this administration. I mean, a couple weeks ago, this one went completely without notice. A couple weeks ago, we finally learned what was going on when the Trump energy secretary mysteriously and suddenly quit the cabinet, quit government, right when impeachment charges were being brought against the president over him trying to force Ukraine to help him win re-election. Turns out, the Trump energy secretary, Rick Perry, had been using his own government job at the time, his cabinet position as energy secretary, to try to line up what might have been a $20 billion energy deal in Ukraine for a company run by his own political donors that he had just left the board of and that he has returned to the board of since he suddenly and unexpectedly quit right in the middle of impeachment. And again, like, blip. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin published his long-promised report, which he said would prove terrible things about Vice President Biden and Ukraine and Biden's son and stuff, and it did not land the way Senator Johnson hoped it would. This, for example, was the headline today from the New York Times on Senator Johnson's work. Quote, Republican inquiry finds no evidence of wrongdoing by Biden. The report, delivered on Wednesday, appeared to be little more than a rehashing of unproven allegations that echoed a Russian disinformation campaign. That's not the way he hoped it would land, but when you're Senator Johnson, you get what you can. Senator Johnson's sources for his dud supposed bombshell report on Joe Biden included one guy who was just sanctioned by the U.S. government for being, quote, an active Russian agent for over a decade, maintaining close connections with the Russian intelligence services. The sanctions declaration against him said that in that role for Russian intelligence, this guy was, quote, waging a covert influence campaign centered on cultivating false and unsubstantiated narratives concerning U.S. officials in the 2020 presidential election. Senator Ron Johnson started denying that he had anything to do with that source, who's a Russian intelligence agent, after the sanctions announcement against him. But he kept citing another source that the FBI explicitly warned Congress about back in March, telling Congress that they should not necessarily take information from this other guy either because they believed him to be a conduit for more Russian intelligence-derived disinformation intended to disrupt our election. But Senator Johnson went ahead with it anyway because that guy was his witness from whom he was getting all this good dirt. Published his report. Look at all this stuff I got about Biden. None of which is proven, but all of which came out of the mouth of this guy who the FBI says is a conduit for Russian intelligence to influence our election. Senator Johnson doesn't have anything on Joe Biden or his family. But he did produce an 80-something page report today that turns out is a pretty good index as to what Russian intelligence has been cooking up this year to try to help Trump get reelected. And this time they're doing it with a knowing assist from the elected Republican U.S. Senator who chairs the Homeland Security Committee, even after the FBI explicitly warned against it. The FBI also issuing that public warning last night that, in their words, foreign actors and cyber criminals will try to attack and disrupt the U.S. presidential election this year, specifically by exploiting the fact that we're not likely to have a result on election night. It will take a while to certify election results, even in normal times, but this year, with COVID necessitating a lot of mail-in balloting, it could take longer than usual, and that, the FBI's warning, is expected to create basically a bullseye for foreign actors and cybercriminals seeking to do us harm. For foreign actors who want to make us disbelieve that the election is sound and that the election results can and should be trusted and that they will produce an election result that tells us legitimately who the next president of the United States will be. Foreign actors seeking to do us harm will seek to undermine our confidence in the election by telling us that it is a hoax and by telling us that any ballots that are counted after Election Day are some sort of scam. Foreign actors seeking to do us harm will stoke that, per the FBI. Also, the president will stoke that, and do that from the White House tonight, per your own eyes and ears. The president is doing exactly what the FBI just warned us is being done by foreign powers hostile to us to try to undo our democracy. They're doing it covertly. The president is doing out loud. It's the exact same message. And it's apparently not just him. As Trump-appointed officials from the White House spokesperson to the Attorney General and everyone in between starts parroting the president's disinformation about how the ballots are a problem and the ballots can't be trusted. Reporter Barton Gellman reports today at The Atlantic that the Trump re-election campaign and Republican legislatures are working right now on a plan to nullify the ballots, to nullify the results of November's election and just install Trump directly for another term through the Electoral College.
The enemy of democracy, and they can impeach the president any day of the week that they want.
100%, Sean. That's the reality. They've been talking about this stuff forever. Like, they pretend like, oh, because you're doing this, now we're going to... You think Chuck Schumer wasn't going to do that anyway? You think they weren't going to stack the courts anyway? That's why I wrote liberal privilege, because I get to hear a lot about privilege these days, and God knows I am blessed. But the liberals can do whatever they want. They don't have a check and balance. There's no one in media that's not a left-wing activist anymore. There's no pretense even at this point of objectivity. They can do and say anything. They can create rules that they don't have to play by. The son of the vice president, the guy that wants to be president from the Democrat side, can be involved with sex trafficking, taking millions from Russian oligarchs with ties to Vladimir Putin, and it's nothing. But if I take a 20-minute meeting, they want to put me in jail for treason. That's liberal privilege. That's what Americans have to see. That is the hatred and the bias that the average American is getting their news from. When a grand jury in an impartial process doesn't give them the answer they want, they can burn down cities and states, and then they threaten it. Congressmen and women out there saying, hey, you know what? We should just burn it all down. You think that if Joe Biden wins, you think that problem's going to go away, or you think it's going to embolden these criminals? I think it emboldens them. The fact that prosecutors in California say, well, we'll see if there was a need or a social justice reason for the looting and the rioting, because nothing screams social justice, Sean, quite like stealing a 62-inch flat screen. It's insanity. The left has lost control. They don't understand what's right and wrong anymore, and they're pushing what's wrong.
I've never heard these kind of threats ever before. A temper tantrum. 29 times in an election year, Donald Trump Jr., there have been Supreme Court vacancies. All 29 times presidents have appointed a nominee. Thank you for being with us. We're getting Bernie